Uhuru. I said, Uhuru. Welcome, 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 comrades. It's good to see you in the place. I am your MC for today, Comrade Fofi Ushairi Alkebulan. And this convention is one of my birthdays for my middle name, Ushairi, which means poetry and poet. I want to salute Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the members of the NCC. I want to salute Comrade Matamela Odom, President of Deepening International People Democratic Uhuru Movement. And I want to salute you, the people, the members of Impedum and the African People's Socialist Party. Uhuru. It is so gracious for you to be here with us today. We would like to welcome you to the 2023 International People Democratic Uhuru Movement Convention and apt name Deepening, the Counteroffensive, completing the Black Power movement. This time, we will win. Uhuru. In this convention, we will be looking back to look forward. Our beginning can be traced back to the local formation of the People's Democratic Uhuru Movement in 1989 in Oakland, California, to the formation of the National People's Democratic Uhuru Movement formed on April 6, 1991 in Chicago, and later to the International People Democratic Uhuru Movement formed in 2001. And you can get this historical chart. All right. Impedum was organized as a part of the counteroffensive against the U.S. counterinsurgency. Impedum was organized as defense and to defend the democratic rights of the African community, bring the masses of African people back into political life. All the workshop and panels this weekend are all practical organized. We will examine the purpose and work of Impedum over the years and chart our way forward. To give us a deeper overview of this weekend's convention is President Matamela Odom. Uhuru.
Uhuru, everybody. As I said, I'm President Matamela Odom, President of the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement. I would like to officially convene this convention, the 31st annual convention of the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement. Just like Fofi said, the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement has a very long history in mass organizing campaigns led by the African People's Socialist Party, with the formal founding of the National People's Democratic Uhuru Movement on April 6, 1991 in Chicago, Illinois. April 6th being the date in which little Bobby Hutton was assassinated in 1968, a moment which really signaled the commencement of the US's counterinsurgency war against the African Revolution of the 1960s, and Chicago, where Fred Hampton and Mark Clark were assassinated in December 1969, effectively signaling a completion of that campaign. Well, we know that the African People's Socialist Party was created to revive and complete the African Revolution of the 1960s, and International People's Democratic Uhuru movement fits into that mission. So it's for that reason today that this convention, like Fofi said, is so important. As we look back, we understand the political mission of the International People's Democratic Uhuru movement. What do we mean by deepening the counteroffensive? What is the counteroffensive? What's NPDM's role in waging that counteroffensive? Completing the Black Power movement, but also this time we will win. Chairman Omar Chattel, of course, has classified the 1960s as a dress rehearsal and this period as the real deal. As we look around the entire African world right now, we see what Chairman Omali Chattel 10 years ago labeled the uneasy equilibrium, the colonialism and crisis becoming ever more evident every single day. So we are at a historic moment, not just for this organization, but for the African Revolution. So I would like to now turn it, what I'd like to do now is to have everybody stand up and join us in the African Nation Fight Song.
Africa.
Even gonna sound. Wow, somebody recognizes our
Israel to Africa. We are winning. Shout Uhuru for independent and free is what we will be. We are winning. Africa will bask in our victory. We are winning. Long live the liberation of our African nation. Freedom, organization, socialist world, our creation. 1 billion strong, yes, we are one. We are winning.
Uhuru! Thank you, Comrade President Masamela Odom. And all you wonderful singers. Now, I will bring up Chairman Omali Yeshitela, our chief founder and the glue that keeps this organization together, to read his address to the founding convention and the National People's Democratic Uhuru Movement. Uhuru, Chairman. Everyone has it in their folder, so please follow along.
Uhuru, comrades, I want to express appreciation to you, Comrade Fofi, for the introduction, to Comrade President Masamela Odom and the International Exec Committee of the of the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, and all of you, the members and all of you who have come to this really important convention. And it is an important convention. It is happening at a critical moment in history. There's actually a page has been turned in human history. I mean, I think it's even people born have the ability to see that something profound is happening, something that you have never experienced before in your lifetime. So it is a critical moment, and I want to acknowledge that. I mean, part of what we are seeing is the fact that the existing social order is rending, it's being shattered. There are implosions in some places and explosions in other places. It's just a critical historical moment. And one thing that some of us are able to see, the end of white power is upon us. I mean, we can see the ongoing collapse of this cruel, vicious social system that owes its existence, its origin, its sustenance to slavery and colonialism. That system is gone. And you've heard me say this before, perhaps, because I don't hunt, but I've been told that, another one, Matsumala. I've been told that by hunters, especially people who hunt animals like deer, and that it's possible to shoot a running deer in the heart and that kill it. And it can still run another 50 yards, even in the process of dying. And I think that's what we're looking at today with this social system. It has been hit in the heart, and it is just running off inertia at this very moment. We see the old order is gone. Some people really express hopes and things like that because of what we have seen recently happening throughout Africa, Mali, Chad, various other places, especially what is characterized as French Africa. It's French Africa, like I'm Jones. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And the origin, has the same source. And people are excited about that. Actually, the challenge that we hear coming from the enemies of freedom, the one who boast most about democracy, et cetera, that somehow what we see happening in Africa, in these various places, these coups, as they characterize them, attacks on democracy. When the truth of the matter is that colonialism is the most anti-democratic act that you can impose on the people. And this was, if anything, a coup against France. Not against Bazoum, not against some of these other puppets who they have in places there, but against France. But that is going to remind us that it's not enough for a military to take power. And even if they wear colorful berets and have a pretty good rap, the people are critical for the movement of history. And military takes power, you hope that they're going to do the right thing. I've heard so many say, well, I hope they do this and that, but you don't have to hope when the people are in power, you understand? So, and that's the place that's the struggle I think is really important for us to grab. We see, but one thing is clear, is that France is a severely wounded beast. It's similar to 1954, when France was in Vietnam, strangling and choking that noble people to death, bleeding them. And then the French, the Vietnamese, extraordinary revolutionary movement that carried the whole world of colonized people on its backs for a period of time, that fought against everything they had. And in 1954, a place called Deepen crushed the mighty French. And people celebrated around the world. We celebrated, but we just reflect on the fact that we did this some time ago in Haiti. When France the colonizer can be beaten, can be crushed. And so we saw that happen in Vietnam. It was something that was a real setback for the social system. But the fact is that after that, the US rushed in. The US rushed in to rescue France, to rescue colonialism. And the Vietnamese had to do it all over again, right? So the point is that France is in severe distress, and all of the other Western colonial powers, most of them are trying to help out. They want to salvage a colonialism, but they don't necessarily want to salvage France. Not everybody. Some have their own interests that even compete and contend with the interests of France, right? But the fact is that something dramatic is happening. And of course, around the world and other places, this deepening revolutionary project unfolding in Venezuela, unfolding in Nicaragua, the Cuban people showing as much determination today as they did in 1959 when they first took power. The fact is that this whole system is really in a state of despair. The creation of this thing they call BRICS. That's a really important thing. One of the reasons BRICS is important is because the existing social order that we are looking at is something that came into being subsequent to the Second and Fearless World War. This is when the United States became the big dog for sure. And the dollar became the world currency, or more or less gold first, and then the US became the center of the whole financial system, generally speaking, among what they would characterize as democratic and free. That's when it happened. That's when the process of building the United Nations happened. That's when you saw the emergence of the International Monetary Fund. the World Bank. This is US, these are US institutions, US dominated control institutions. NATO comes in 49, the same NATO, that's an issue right now. All of this came into existence and helped to shape and helped to give definition to how colonial white power looked at that time. This is the foundation of the whole social system. And it is rending now. It is collapsing, it's split. People all around the world are trying to be free. And then on top of that, the United States having to contend with these kinds of issues and forces that reemerges in a very important way on the international scene, countries like Russia and China challenging the United States. And of course, what Russia and China are interested in, first of all, they're interested in Russians and Chinese, make no mistake about that. And I think it's important because some people get carried away in wrong directions when they see this. And we say it's important because it's fracturing the existing social order. But just because something is fracturing the traditional social order doesn't mean that you're going to be free, right? Who will determine whether we are free or not? We will make that determination, right? So that's one of the things that we need to understand and how to go into our calculation. We look at what's happening in Africa. And so the French flag is being destroyed and the French embassy is being attacked, and then they're carrying Russian flags. They're not carrying the red, black, and the green. They're not carrying Garvey's flag. They're not carrying the flag representative of an independent free people. That's when you put your flag up when you're free. Or if you're struggling for free, your flag becomes a symbol of the national unity and national interest that we have. And so, I'm saying that I'm happy what we see happening in terms of this assault that's being made on the colonial order, but that's not the same thing as saying what's going to make us free, because some people are confused around that, which is one of the reasons this convention is important and significant when we look at what's happening in the world, how we begin to weigh our own interests. So first of all, again, I would really like to express my appreciation and salutations to Comrade President Masamela Odom. And I want to give my regards and regrets for Comrade Deputy Chair Honors Zane Chattel, who would have been here, wanted to be here, planned to be here, et cetera. But there are things that had to be taken care of in Florida that she's dealing with. Florida and other places, she's dealing with all kinds of stuff, but I want to send a special shout out per usual to the members of NPDOM and our movement in Africa and other places where this blood-sucking parasitic social system steal all the resources, so people don't have electricity sometimes, and people don't have decent infrastructure, and so they have to get together in groups sometimes, or find a place where they can have access to the internet. And so we see people doing that in groups, and I know that's happening in Liberia. I know Sierra Leone, people are doing it in groups in some places, in townships in South Africa, at least in those places, and perhaps some other places. But I want to just express appreciation and shout out to you. Well, while I'm doing that, I say something about Afur, who is my sister-in-law in Accra, and also part of the movement. And so it's good to see everybody who's here. I see veterans who are here. You know, you go to meetings and you often hear people say, well, where are the young people? We really need the young people, young people, young people. And young people are wonderful. And one thing this white guy's name was Shakespeare said that youth is wasted on the young in a certain way. So young people, and they have a lot of energy, et cetera, but movements need maturity. They do. They do. Movements must have a maturity. And that's one of the things that I think that distinguishes the African People's Socialist Party, to exist long enough to achieve experience and maturity, political maturity, right? So that we can understand some things. I mention that too, is because I see comrades who've been part of this movement in this room now for many, many, many years. One sister just told me, I haven't seen you in 20 years. I said, and obviously Comrade Nyundu here from from Fort Myers, a founding member of the African People's Socialist Party. That goes back a long time. And, Comrade Lisa from Jersey, she's just been invaluable and foundational in terms of, these are comrades who sort of create like an ideological and political foundation, all of us walking on that because of experience and stuff and development. And I want to acknowledge also in the room, Comrade Diop Ulukbala, because Diop himself was once president of International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement. Ain't that right? Yes, sir. I thought so. Yeah, Uhuru. And my man, I'm gonna stop doing this in a minute because I'm waxing nostalgic, but I really need to appreciate this brother, Chase Eldridge Cleaver. We had to restrain this brother because he wanted to jump on Eldridge Cleaver. Alpha Eldridge had, gone that year and he looked up in the moon and he saw God or something like that and came back, like this religious Mooney. And so that did help him, get rid of those charges that he had on him that allowed him to come back to the country. But so he came to this public library. I think that library might have been in Oakland or Berkeley. And this guy's on some kind of probation, parole. He had on the biggest hip gun I ever seen. This big gun on his hip in the library. And he started talking about the best, most beautiful document that's out there. He read, he waved it in the air, and I think it was either the Declaration of Independence or some kind of American stuff. And Comrade Malik went ballistic. He started frothing at the mouth and said, "Malik, we don't jump on people in public places." I had to drag Malik out and Comrade Malik. He's been here a long, long time. He came into the movement at the time we were building for the first tribunal on reparations for African people that happened in Brooklyn, New York in 1982. And so Malik was there. Good to see Comrade Malik. And then there are other folk in the room that, comrades, I'm revealing your age when I start saying some of this stuff, but there are comrades in the room who've been here for a long time. And I have a reason for mentioning that. Comrade Penny Hess, Comrade Kitty Riley, being two of them. And perhaps this process will at least infer why I've gone over this about so many people being involved for a long time. And hopefully it will contribute to a better understanding of what this first part of the convention is about. And also, we'll have, I think later on today, Fred Hampton Jr. Will be here. And I mentioned Fred Hampton Jr. Because for whatever motivation that he has for being here, other than the fact that he unites with our movement, Fred was the first president of NPDOM in Chicago. He was the first local president of NPDOM in Chicago. His mother, Akua, was the first president of the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement. And so I'm just referencing all of these people, and then I'm going to read to you something that was presented to the first convention of the People's Democratic Uhuru Movement. You've heard Comrade Masamela say something about there's been a morphing of the name. Initially, when it was created in Oakland, California, it was the People's Democratic Uhuru Movement. And our people have never not wanted to be free. And this government has never not attempted to crush the efforts of our people to be free. And the 1960s, our movements suffered a severe defeat, assassinations every place. So we're talking about Fred Hampton, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Patrice Lumumba, Kwame Nkrumah overthrown, just people being murdered, on a regular basis. That somebody says that the arm of criticism became criticism by arm. And that was what was happening. And so in Oakland, we went into Oakland in I think around 80. And a striking thing about Oakland at that time, this had been the headquarters of the Black Panther Party, which was a internationally based revolutionary organization. And I argue that it was at that time the revolutionary center, the center of the African Revolution was within the Black Panther Party, which didn't mean that I agreed with everything, but they literally were the vanguard. They were central to our movement at that time. And we get into Oakland, and it was striking because, you could almost still smell the cordite in the air. You could see victims in the African community, because unlike the white people, they go on a strike and workers strike and stuff like that, they crush the strike, do these kinds of things like that. For the African revolution, the war against the whole people, you see. And so it's just a vicious assault, on the community. And here you have the center. In Oakland, you can imagine the kind of damage they did in Oakland. So that was real obvious. And when we began to organize, you can't start where the Panthers were killed. You can't start making the revolution. You just can't. People have been crushed, people have been demoralized, people don't necessarily have a good summation of what's going on. The counterinsurgency, that's what a counterinsurgency is. A counterinsurgency is a war that's made against the people. It has no terms against the people in order to either crush their resistance, their movement, or prevent their movement from emerging in the world. And Oakland, and when they come at African people, it's not, you don't just break up a strike. That's why you can see these kind of assassinations of white people, the white left in the 1960s that you saw happening throughout the African world. They were killing us everywhere. They were implementing mass prisons, et cetera, that had their origin in places like Kenya and other places. So this is what was happening. Housing projects had actually become places where people had to have to show ID to get to the housing project. Cameras everywhere. The white people put your name on a list. If your name is on the list, by virtue of them putting your name on the list, if you show up in the housing project, they can put you in jail. This is the kind of stuff that we were contending with. So people were demoralized, making a revolution. Every time we get a leader, the white man killing. That's what that was the sentiment that prevailed at the time. So you can't make a revolution just because you want to make a revolution. You have to look at what are the necessities for making a revolution. What force do you need to make a revolution? First of all, the objective condition revolution needs to exist, don't they? The objective condition, you know what I mean by objective? Objective is that which is in the world. Those conditions in the world, have to exist that facilitate the process of making a revolution, and the subjective forces have to exist. What do I mean by subjective? Objective is what's in the world. Subjective is what's in your head. So we have to have those forces, subjective forces, thinking forces, who can be organized and have a plan to fight for freedom, and who can build the African Party, who can build the International Democratic Uhuru movement and who can fill the ranks of the African People's Socialist Party and the International People's Democratic Uhuru movement. That's what you need. You need objective conditions. You need also the subjective forces. And the objective conditions, I'm telling you, they're ripe. Never seen them riper than what you see today. even the white people rising up that you call right wing. That's who attacked the Capitol. Can you see? You know, people like the US and some other folks like to make a big deal of the fact that this Wagner group was marching. They say they're marching on the Kremlin. They're threatening, you know, the Kremlin and what have. What? And then, wow, look at this. That shows you what a shaky foundation Putin is in. If Putin is in a shaky situation because some forces were marching on the Kremlin, I forgot how many miles they got away from the Kremlin, what do you think the impact was when you had all those white people climbing the walls of the US Capitol, marching and busting into the doors, talking about hanging chasing our vice president through the Capitol Hall, talking about hanging him, defecating on the floor, taking the seat of the third most powerful elected force in this country, and they laughing at Putin. If Putin was in trouble, what the hell was this that just happened, you know, on January 6th, right? If Putin was in trouble, then somebody must be giving some kind of mouth-to-mouth resuscitation to whoever leads this entity right now in this country. So my basic point is that it's a shaky situation, a shaky foundation. Nothing was as it was yesterday. And so we have this incredible transformation that's happening in the world. So we had to say, how do we take advantage of these objective conditions? Objective conditions change us. So, but you still got to have subjective forces, got to have subjective forces that will help to contribute to building what you need when objective conditions materialize in the world. I don't know if that was too obtuse. So that's what we took on. Make it possible to do this thing. And you make it possible to do what has to be done by creating the conditions necessary for those things to emerge, right? Make it possible. I mean, things can happen in a way, but it's a lot helpful if you till the ground first. Who is the marketplace? People in here who control the farmers market. You till the ground first, and you do other kinds of things before you plant the seed. But you got to do that stuff. If you don't do it, you know, you've seen life tries to happen, doesn't it? You've seen grass grow up through cement, right? If you don't do it, something might happen, but the better chance you make it is you create the conditions to make it happen. So this is a report that I made to the founding convention of the National People's Democratic Uhuru Movement in Oakland, California. And it shows just how fitting the theme for this convention is. The fact is that we have to deepen the counterinsurgency. You know what a counterinsurgency is? Let me say, an insurgency is a movement of the people to try to overturn the oppression that they're experiencing. That people begin to move toward freedom. That's the insurgency, and it takes a definite kind of form and shape, et cetera. A counterinsurgency is to make that not happen, to keep it from happening, to crush the insurgency. Insurgency, has characteristics, revolution, people rising up and organize and moving toward that. That's an insurgency, right? And so what we say, we want to deepen the counterinsurgency because we've initiated counterinsurgency a long time ago that brought us here. I'm going to go ahead and read now. I've spoken too much thus far. So this is a report by Chairman Mali Chatella to the National People's Democratic Uhuru Movement. Remember, founding convention, April 6, 1991. We have arrived here in Chicago at this historic founding convention of the National People's Democratic Uhuru Movement on April 6, 1991. Both the date of our convention and its site here in Chicago have tremendous symbolic significance for our task over the 2 days we will be convening. It was on April 6, 1968, 23 years ago, that 17-year-old Black Panther Party member Bobby Hutton was assassinated by a mob of policemen in Oakland, California. 20 months later, on December 4th, 1969, 21-year-old Fred Hampton was executed in his bed by Chicago Colonialist Police Force here in this city, which is in Chicago. Also murdered in the 4 a.m. raid in the Panther House was Mark Clark. We mentioned the murders of Bobby Hutton, Mark Clark, and Fred Hampton, because they are three of the victims whose brutal assassinations helped to give the counterinsurgency its notorious character. It was the same counterinsurgency that defeated the Black Revolution of the 60s and initiated the current anti-democratic process against our African people that this meeting was called to overturn. The founding convention, the founding NPDUM convention was founded to overturn the consequences of these murders, these attacks on our movement. Our choice of this day and this place for our convention were conscious choices which recognize the significance of symbolism. They are choices which attempt to make the connection between the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 60s, a defeat which resulted in the death of these four comrade brothers, and the rebirth of that movement explicit in our presence today. This connection is implicit in Fred Hampton's famous dictum, "You can murder a liberator, but you can't murder liberation." Bobby Hutton, Mark Clark, and Fred Hampton were members of the Black Panther Party, which at the time of their assassinations by the US white power colonialist state was a revolutionary party. Indeed, it was the closest thing to a revolutionary center that had existed within the US since the Garvey movement during the first quarter of this century. However, the assassinations of Mark Clark, Fred Hampton, and Bobby Hutton, and the destruction of the Black Panther Party as a revolutionary organization were the culmination of a much larger, more comprehensive counterinsurgency aimed at defeating the Black Revolution of the 60s by disrupting and destroying the independent organizations of our domestically colonized people and killing off and otherwise neutralizing independent and revolutionary African leaders and personalities. You have to begin to understand that. We see these killings of different persons as individual incidents. We make calendars and mark it down in history, but we don't make the connections. Although the US colonialist counterinsurgency affected virtually every African organization and personality of significance within the United States, its main target was the anti-colonial sector of our movement. This sector was characterized by the US government, by the FBI, as militant Black nationalist hate groups, by the Federal Bureau of Investigation in its infamous August 25th, 1967 directive that officially established the long-range goals of the operation. This government targeting of the anti-colonial sector of our movement for counterinsurgency operations resulted in more than the defeat of militant Black nationalists. It meant more than the defeat of militant Black nationalists. It also meant the defeat of a particular set of politics in the African community to the advantage of another set of politics which had actually lost out in the ideological contest within our movement. What am I talking about? When they killed Malcolm and they even killed King and these other forces, they didn't just knock out some people who were just there and present. They attacked philosophy, they attacked ideology. They attacked the ideology of independence. And that is not just happening in some kind of innocent way. When they attacked the ideology of independence, there have always been two trends in our communities. One that was the trend to try to make the best you can under slavery, and the other one was about ending this relationship with slavery. And they're called moderates and stuff like that, the NAACP, the SCLC even, and other forces like that. They're characterized as moderates, but their objective is not to overturn this relationship. It's they're convinced that you can find a way to make it better. And so they want to make slavery better, as opposed to those who wanted to end slavery altogether. And that's the contradiction. So they didn't just kill these human beings, they killed those who were struggling to end the relationship that Black people have with slavery and colonialism. And in the process of doing that, it elevated that other sector in the community that was talking about assimilation as the answer. That's why, for example, people like to brag about it, and they do brag about it. The NAACP being the oldest and largest organization in the African community. Yeah, I got that. But where is their basketball court for the children? Where is their farmers market? Where are the institutions that they have created for economic development? And they don't create institutions of economic. Garvey did. Why? Garvey said that we want to end the relationship to slavery and colonialism and have to feed, clothe, and house ourselves. NAACP's process is to join in with the colonizers and get them to feed you. In St. Louis, which is an economically depressed city, in terms of the North and how Black people live, they have a situation where they destroyed all the Black businesses, all the ability for Black people to feed, clothe, and house ourselves, destroyed even the dwellings that we live in and things like that, on the one hand. But on the other hand, what they have also are places where you can drive up outside the church and they have boxes with some bananas in it and fruit in it, and you can go here and get this free, this free, this, and that on the side street. They have pass out hot dogs. This is ridiculous. So they take away your capacity, they destroy your capacity to feed, clothe, and house yourselves, and then they put you on colonialism's tip. You know, so that's where you have to get your nourishment all the time. And so the objective then for some of us is to end this damn relationship like that, and for others of us to get more fruit out there by the churches and to get more hot dogs given away to Black people. They fight for a kind of welfare slavery as opposed to independence, which is why Harriet Tubman had to carry a gun. One of the reasons she had to carry a gun, not just because she might run to the white man, but because the Negroes who was with her, they started thinking about, I don't know what the hell this is. What is freedom? I do know Master Ball has a place where I can sleep. I know I can get some pig guts if I stay there, and they want to turn back. And Harriet Tubman said, no. Said, dead man tell no tales. You rolling with us, bro. And but that's why it happened. You see what I'm saying? So there's this tendency all the time in our community. One tendency is how do you make things better in slavery, under slavery, and the other one is talk about ending slavery altogether. We believe in making stuff better in slavery as a part of the process of ending slavery, as a part of the process of taking power over our own lives. We do not concede the right of anybody to control African people. We cannot make that concession. It's a betrayal of every person who's come before us and those, who we are bringing into existence. To say that we won't take responsibility for knowing for the ability of our children to be fed, clothed, and housed. We do that. That's what our responsibility is. That's why the FBI intend to give me a life sentence. Anyway, so we said this government targeting the anti-colonial sector of our movement, and I saw President Masamela was looking at his watch in a real serious way, so I'm going to expedite this process. He acted like, he didn't, he look at his watch. Make sure, he knew I couldn't see it from here. But I could see him doing this from here. So we said that although the U.S. colonialist counterinsurgency affected virtually every African organization and personality of significance within the U.S., its main target was the anti-colonial sector of our movement. This sector was characterized as quote-unquote militant Black nationalist hate groups by the Federal Bureau of Investigation in its infamous August 25th, 1967 Directive that officially established the long-range goals of the operation. This government targeting of the anti-colonial sector of our movement for counterinsurgency operations resulted in more than the defeat of militant black nationalists, defeat of a particular set of politics in the African community to the advantage of another set of politics, which has actually lost out in the ideological contest within our community. And that was the thing that they were concerned with King, because King, as you know, promoted this whole philosophical nonviolence, which shouldn't be too confused by, but he promoted this philosophical nonviolence. But the problem was, and the FBI, we will see, predicted what would make him a threat to them. The problem was that King led a movement, and there's this upswell of black people throughout this country. Even on the march, the last significant march King was in before he was assassinated, who were demanding black power. Black power. You had these charismatic young people talking about black power, power, power. The movement had gone from that place of just where we were trying to find a better way on the plantation, right? And was talking about how do we achieve control of our own lives. That's what the Black Power movement did. And so this was the threat, because King, a leader has to have followers. And if all your followers are talking about black power, if all your followers are massively moving in the direction for power, then obviously you're gonna have to go in that direction, or you're gonna have to get out of the way. And so the FBI understood that clearly. And plus, there are other things King people don't understand about King. King was there in Addis, in Ghana, in Accra, when Nkrumah went to power as head of state. King was there, you understand? So he wasn't just some guy. He had a connection to, deep connection to who he was as a black person, at least. So the defeat of the anti-colonial sector of our movement, the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 60s was the victory for white bourgeois liberalism and the liberal sector of the African petty bourgeoisie, whose interests were restricted to democratic rights under colonial white power. Make a note, comment. The U.S. federal government made its animosity toward the anti-colonial movement clear in its internal documents. Prior to its decision to assassinate Dr. Martin Luther King, the Federal Bureau of Investigation put forth as a criterion for his assassination that he abandoned liberalism. The long-range goals of the FBI's counterinsurgency activity against our movement included, as its second point, the directive to prevent the rise of a messiah who could unify and electrify the militant black nationalist movement. About King, the document read, King could be a very real contender for this position should he abandon his supposed obedience to white liberal doctrines and embrace black nationalism. The civil rights movement was supported by the liberal sector of the colonial white ruling class, but the entire white ruling class and its instruments of state power, like the FBI, were always clear in their total opposition to our struggle for self-determination, our struggle for absolute control of our own lives, by our own colonized peoples to the exclusion of any other power. I really want this to be understood and heard. The civil rights movement was supported by the liberal sector of the colonial white ruling class. But the entire white ruling class and its instruments of state power, like the FBI, were always clear in their total opposition to our struggle for self-determination, our struggle for absolute control over our own lives by our own colonized people to the exclusion of any other power. So the liberals, you see, could talk about fighting for this and fighting for that, like Biden does, and the Democratic Party does right now. But they are no different from the so-called conservatives and right-wings in terms of their opposition to the liberation of African peoples. It's Biden's government, it's Biden's FBI, it's Biden's Justice Department that attacked us because we're negating the power of colonialism in so many places, including right here in St. Louis. While the struggle for democratic rights under the leadership of the liberal African petty bourgeoisie did mobilize millions of African people, especially the impoverished working masses, it was nevertheless a struggle that was primarily in the interest of the allied liberal African petty bourgeoisie or middle class and the liberal sector of the white ruling class. The liberal sector of the white ruling class entered into this alliance with the liberal African petty bourgeoisie in order to overturn the prevailing relations of production. This is a misprint. The prevailing relations of production which prevented the African workers from leaving the labor-intensive capitalist production of the South to work in the capital-intensive factory-based production in the North and other areas of the US. An outcome of the Second Imperialist World War was the opening of the colonial markets to the United States. The liberal bourgeoisie needed full access to African workers from the South because of the consequent expanded productive capacity of US industry. Make a note. On the other hand, the liberal African petty bourgeoisie saw the struggle for democracy and its alliance with the liberal white ruling class as a means by which it could achieve this economic aim by conquest of political power through the electoral process, particularly in the South, where in many instances, Black Africans outnumbered North Americans or white people. While the liberal African petty bourgeoisie were interested in integrating into the white power system, by 1966, after major rebellions in several cities and passage of a Civil Rights Bill and Voter Rights Act, the formal achievement of democratic rights within the context of the limited revolution of the African petty bourgeoisie, it was clear that the masses of impoverished African people could not be satisfied with a formal declaration of democracy. That's what we talked about.
Yeah.
In 1966, the demand for Black power, the formation of the Black Panther Party, and smaller, lesser-known colonialist, anti-colonialist organizations throughout the U.S. revealed the deep split between the domestically colonized African population, the deep split within the domestically colonized African population between the liberal African petty bourgeoisie, represented in such organizations as the NAACP, National Urban League, and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and the great majority of African workers and patriotic Black nationalists. In fact, the U.S. counterinsurgency against the Black Revolution of the 60s was greatly facilitated by the public ideological and political support given the colonialist state by the liberal African petty bourgeois leaders in the war against the Black Revolution of the 1960s. They worked with them. These leaders publicly denounced revolution and Black power. Some even entered into secret agreements with the U.S. secret political police to help defeat the Black Revolution of the 1960s. In the political report to the African People's Socialist Party Third Congress held in Florida last September, the U.S. counterinsurgency was summed up thusly, and I'm quoting from that political report that would have been held in what, 1990. The U.S. counterinsurgency against the U.S.-based African Revolution was extensive. Several U.S. presidents and lesser political figures from governors, senators, and local mayors were involved, as well as various agencies and levels of the government, including federal and state legislatures. This also included the draft board, internal revenue draft board. They used to have a situation in the United States where when a person became 18 years, they had to register for the draft, so that the U.S. military would have their numbers and could pull them into the U.S. military service in a given moment. And it was illegal not to do that, to register. So, but the draft board was one of them, the Internal Revenue Service, judges, grand juries, local military police organization, all branches of the U.S. military, the Central Intelligence Agency, as well as the National Security Agency. The counterinsurgency also included participation by the white left and the new sector of Black puppet neo-colonial politicians rising up off the defeat of the Black Revolution. The counterinsurgency was brutal and terroristic, sometimes with the help of special designer laws, such as the Ralph Brown Law, which prohibited crossing state borders in order to incite to riot. On a local level, laws prohibiting verbal abuse to police were created in St. Petersburg, Florida. On a state level, laws were passed, such as in Florida, which prohibited inciting to riot, with criteria for arrest being the intent of the inciters, whether the riot happened or not. So thought crime. Federal no-knock laws were created, which abrogated U.S. constitutional prohibition on illegal entry. That's what they did with Fred. And allow for an escalation of pre-dawn police raids, some of which resulted in blatant police murder, such as that of Black Panther leader Fred Hampton on December 4th, 1969 in Chicago, Bobby Hutter, Samuel Napier, John Huggins, Bunchy Carter, Mark Clark, George and Jonathan Jackson, and Fred Hampton were but a few of the members of the Black Panther Party who were martyred by the U.S. colonial counterinsurgency. Martin Luther King of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Carl Hampton of People's Party No. 2 in Houston, Texas, and Lawrence Mann, co-founder of the African People's Socialist Party in Florida, are only 3 more of the countless members of Africans murdered by the counterinsurgency in the U.S. attempt to achieve class peace within U.S. borders. Countless others were simply kidnapped from our colonially oppressed communities under the guise of law by a colonial power whose laws are designed to maintain U.S. capitalist colonialism. Community meetings were often raided by gun-wielding colonial police, terrorizing meeting attendants. Independent community programs were destroyed, offices and materials were burned to the ground. Revolutionary newspapers were hijacked, sometimes destroyed or soiled or otherwise made unusable. And then on the back of this extensive military attack on our movement, the US government created phony revolutionary organizations, mostly white, to challenge, I say mostly white, those are the ones that we became aware of mostly. But there were African ones too, to challenge the ideological legitimacy, political orientation, and organizational stability of the badly battered Black revolution that had once moved J. Edgar Hoover to define it as the most serious threat to the internal security of the United States since the Civil War. In 1971, US President Richard Milhous Nixon chose William C. Sullivan to initiate a so-called war on heroin against the so-called drug cartel in Southeast Asia, where the United States just happened to be engaged in a vicious genocidal counterinsurgency war against the people of Vietnam. Sullivan had been the architect of the FBI's counterinsurgency efforts against the Black Revolution of the 60s, known as the Counterintelligence Program or COINTELPRO. The long-term goals of Sullivan's generally successful plan were prevent the coalition of militant Black nationalist groups. This is the US government, this is from the United States government. People want to sometimes talk about the FBI not as if it were not an instrument of the US government. It's not some group that's just out there doing stuff randomly. So here is what the government has set out in the form of the FBI. These are long-term goals. Prevent the coalition of militant Black nationalist groups. Prevent the rise of a messiah who could unify and electrify the militant Black nationalist movement. Prevent violence on the part of Black nationalist groups. Prevent militant Black nationalist groups and leaders from gaining respectability by discrediting them, and prevent the long-range growth of militant Black nationalist organizations, especially among the youth. Along with forces like G. Gordon Liddy, these are names, by the way, you should Google. I'm reading these names off. This is not some mysterious, that's, what do you call it? This is something that you can check on historically. Along with forces like G. Gordon Liddy and E. Howard Hunt, in association with figures like Richard Secor, recently made notorious by the gun-running, drug-smuggling Iran-Contra scandal that the United States initiated under Reagan. Sullivan participated in founding the Office of Drug Abuse Law Enforcement, or DALE, which is known today as the Drug Enforcement Agency, the DEA. It was Sullivan, along with these and other agents of various officials and unofficial intelligence agencies, who initiated the heroin epidemic within our oppressed colonized community as the final blow to defeat the Black Revolution of the 60s. Through drug addiction, demoralization, and temporary destruction of the will to resist US domestic colonialism. By 1979, the Iranian and Nicaraguan revolutions had refocused US counterinsurgent activities on the Middle East and Latin America. The intra-ruling class policy disputes concerning these revolutions resulted in the so-called Iran-Contra scandal, which revealed to public view the intensive U.S. involvement of the cocaine trade from Latin America. However, for the domestically colonized African community, it was not the revelations from highly controlled congressional hearings that convinced us that the U.S. government was the world's biggest drug pusher. It was what was happening in our impoverished communities that convinced us. Suddenly, cocaine, which had previously been considered an upper-class drug of the North American population, was now flooding the African community in a cheaper, deadlier derivative now known as crack. The counterinsurgency, which had begun in the 60s with the explicit aim of destroying the independent anti-colonial organizations and leaders, had now been turned against the whole people. Just as in the days of Jim Crow, prior to the success of the civil rights movement, the drugs which were used to destabilize the African community, making it harder to organize for revolution, were and are also used as political justifications for brutal repression and militarization of the African community. The limited revolution of the liberals had got out of hand when the colonized masses had found their own organization, their own programs, and their own independent interests. The U.S. government moved viciously against this struggle for happiness and return of our stolen resources. And when the anti-colonial struggle had become the most representative of and most dynamic voice of our people, the U.S. government, with the support of the liberal African petty bourgeoisie, initiated a war without terms of assassination, imprisonment, slander, chemical warfare, including drugs, to put it down. In 1969, then U.S. Attorney General John Mitchell went so far as to publicly state that the Black Panther Party would be destroyed by the end of that year. The murder of Fred Hampton on December 4th, 1969 must have been viewed by Mitchell and his cohorts as the final blow in bringing the prediction, his prediction to fruition. The military component of the counterinsurgency was combined with U.S. slander against our movement and our entire people, as well as the imposition of drugs and a drug economy onto our economically dependent colonized community. It would starve you and then throw you poison meat and say, why you eat that poison meat? And this is what happened, they starve our community. Who controls the economy in this country? Not your little local, as you like to call it, Arab on the corner. Who controls the economy in your community where you live, in this country? It's the same forces that's sending the police out to kill you and things like that. So they control the economy. They don't allow you to get a job so you can feed your family and yourself in this economy. And then they put something in the economy that can employ you called dope. And then they act like they're surprised that people sell dope in the community. They're the dope pushers. Uncle Sam is the pusher man. Yeah. This is something that we understood a long time ago. So we say the liberal sector of the white ruling class had funded the civil rights movement. They needed the limited revolution for their own economic interests following the Second Imperialist War. The defeat of the Black Revolution in the 60s was a victory for the liberal white ruling class and its junior partner, the liberal African petty bourgeoisie, whose limited revolution for democracy, prestige, and material wealth for itself was to be at the expense of democracy, prestige, and material wealth for the broad masses of our wretched and brutalized people. In the final analysis, it has been this relationship between the white ruling class and the African petty bourgeoisie that has proved the most devastating component of U.S. counterinsurgency. For it is the African petty bourgeoisie that functions as the social base for the U.S. neocolonial strategy. Currently, the linchpin of the U.S. counterinsurgency. The U.S. neocolonial strategy is simply a strategy of a formal transfer of political power to the African petty bourgeoisie, generally through the electoral process, while economic control and hence de facto power remains in the hands of the white ruling class. The U.S. neocolonial strategy has provided an excellent cover for U.S. domestic colonialism and up to now, along with historical white opportunism, has contributed magnificently to the maintenance of class peace within the United States and the isolation of the suffering African working class within the United States and internationally. And this is something that cannot be overstated. The isolation of the African working people, working class, the suffering masses of the people, who every day you look up and they're talking about they taking away this right or that right, or changing this law or that law, and it does it in quiet. You don't hear, you don't even see the white left, generally speaking, you don't see, white people, generally speaking, upset. It's the African community that's being isolated. That's the kind of stuff we've been breaking out of for a long period of time, but that's their strategic objective, to keep us isolated. And there are nationalists in our own community who help them to do that. When I say help them to do that, by attacking anything that recognizes strategically the significance of winning what can be won, where it can be won for the objective of total liberation of our people. So there are now an estimated 7,000 to 10,000 African elected officials in the United States. This is in, again, what was that, 1989? 91. Added to this number are the thousands of Africans who serve in their administration, plus the other thousands who serve within the federal government and other administrations of white politicians who require black faces for political color. On top of this, there are the Africans with high profiles within various organizations of the colonial states, such as chiefs and officers of police departments, prison wardens, public housing authority directors, etc. In Baltimore, Maryland, Oakland, California, St. Petersburg, Florida, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, these neo-colonial forces have actually led aggressive police attacks on anti-colonial movement, even as it progresses toward rebuilding, itself. Here in Chicago, former Black Panther Party leader, Alderman Bobby Rush, he was an alderman at that time, has actually publicly advocated federal police deployment against Africans in public housing projects. National Guard, Rush did that. In Atlanta, Georgia, and Washington, D.C., neo-colonial African administrators have initiated curfew laws, under which young Africans are subject to arrest if found out in public after certain hours. In Philadelphia, an African mayor presided over and defended the bombing of a house occupied by African militants that resulted in the incineration of African men, women, and children, and an entire African neighborhood. While these neo-colonialist elected officials and administrators are often warmly and paternalistically referred to by white ruling class media sources as representatives of Black power, nothing could be further from the truth. They are the opposite of Black power. And should understand this, because what you see now, the entire US military is formally, the whole military is formally led by Black people. It's a Black man, Lord Austin, who is over the Defense Department. It's a Black man. For the first time in the 246-year history of the Marine Corps, they made a Black man, a 4-star general, and then put him over AFRICOM, over Black people in Africa and other places. It's a Black man who, from the Air Force, who a general, who they just made the chief of what do they call it? The chief of the Joint Chief, the head of the Joint Chief of Staff of all the military forces in this country. So that's what we're looking at. So this is not Black power. That's white power in blackface.
That's right.
Like generally, your local alder person, city council person is, generally speaking. The defeat of the Black Power revolution was a condition for their success. They do not represent Black power, rather they represent a revolution hijacked. And somebody in NAACP gonna give them some awards for the first Black person, this and that, yeah, the sharpest red, black, and green billy club.
They didn't worship Dr. Summerall, and they're so honored.
Yeah. So neo-colonialism allows the liberal white ruling class and white capitalist colonialist society in general to obscure the real conditions of existence for the broad masses of African people. It holds up these special neo-colonial individuals as either evidence of the conditions of existence for all African people, or as evidence of what the rest of us supposedly could be if we applied ourselves like the neo-colonialists that took advantage of what America has to offer. Moreover, the fact that only one of the elected officials within the U.S. has criticized the colonial government for its treatment of Africans and called for some kind of conditional resistance from the African masses gives substance to the slanderous lie that the wretched conditions of existence for our people is self-inflicted. And you hear that. We do it to ourselves. Get your ass off that couch and then go to this meeting and let's get order. We do it to ourselves. You know, that should be characterized as self-criticism from you. You know, we do it to ourselves. Yeah. Like that's a major contortionist trick that George Floyd must have used. How the hell do you put your knee in your own neck? I'm trying to figure that out. You understand, like that. However, we have not come to Chicago on this historic occasion for a recitation of the victories of the white ruling class counterinsurgency. We are here in Chicago on April 6th as a statement of the failure of the counterinsurgency. Indeed, Fred Hampton, the murdered liberator, was correct. You can murder a liberator, but you can't murder liberation. Some of you who are present today may very well see your presence as accidental. Perhaps you accidentally came upon a copy of the Brennsville newspaper or a brochure announcing the founding of the National People's Democratic Uhuru movement today. Perhaps you saw Cool and Jerry, Fred Hampton's widow, and herself a survivor of December 4th, 1969 pre-dawn massacre on television and heard her announce today's convention. Perhaps you heard the solidarity work on the radio or bumped into an Uhuru organizer on your campus or in your community. Whatever the case, we want to say right now that your presence here is no accident. It is a consequence of hard work that is consistent with a major strategic aim to complete the Black Revolution of the 60s. The fifth point of the FBI's 1967 counterinsurgency program reads thusly, quote, "A final goal should be to prevent the long-range growth of militant Black nationalist organizations, especially among youth," unquote. It is here that the ultimate failure of the U.S. counterinsurgency will be determined. For even as the white ruling class and liberals of all nationalities were celebrating the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 60s, our party was being born in St. Petersburg, Florida in 1972, out of the best materials provided by the Black Revolution of the 60s. At the third Congress of our party held in September of last year, the significance of the party's survival and existence was summed up in this way, and I'm quoting, "Our fighting survival has also meant something else very important to our movement and our party, and that is revolutionary continuity from one period to another." Revolutionary continuity from one period to another. This is something that they would disrupt if they can in every instance. This is what this life sentence that they holding over my head is about, to disrupt the continuity of a revolutionary movement we have maintained up to now. That's what this is about. That's why we're here on today. Historically, the white ruling class has been so vicious in its response to the existence of revolutionary anti-colonial African organizations that the organizations and hence our movement have not been able to accumulate organizational, political, and ideological maturity, making it unable to resolve pressing political and ideological contradictions within the movement. Thank you for that word. The development of a revolutionary economy takes years. It does. And the revolution requires a stable organization of revolutionary leaders, neither of which can occur when our revolutionary organizations have only been allowed lifespans of 2 or 3 years due to intense political repression. Our party is comprised of a membership and a history which spanned from the era of civil rights struggle through revolution, through the rise of the counterinsurgency and military defeat. The membership of our party has included members from the military elite, destroyed Texas-based People's Party, number 2, the Black Panther Party, the Kansas-based Cultural Workers, former student, later changed to Youth Organization for Black Unity members, ex-National Black United Front members from New York, members of the Communist Party USA and Communist Workers Party, as well as forces from the All African People's Revolutionary Party. These and other elements have contributed to the form and character of our party, but all of these contributions were forged onto an organization whose basic content was consolidated during the resistance to and fighting survival of the brutal US colonial counterinsurgency. Nor was survival itself enough. What was required to give our party the organization, political, and ideological character that we have was our resistance. While engaged in struggle with our colonial oppressors, we always maintained strong connections with our people. For the 19 years since its founding in 1972, our party has been struggling to rebuild and complete the Black Revolution of the 60s. For 19 years, we have worked to build and consolidate the African People's Socialist Party as the advanced detachment of the most slandered, feared, and despised African working class that continues even today to experience the brunt of the continuously evolving US counterinsurgency. Your presence here today is no accident. It is the consequence of 19 years of struggle of our party to solve the problems of the revolution left to us by the counterinsurgency. For 19 years, the African People's Socialist Party struggled to bring the mass of African people back into political life. We have struggled to mobilize the people in defense of their own interests around questions of colonial police violence, colonialist education systems that administrates poor housing, and the absence of housing altogether, colonial judicial terror, and an anti-Black colonialist prison system. We are the only organization to ever organize a mass organization, the African National Reparations Organization, ANRO, to fight for reparations to our people for slavery, colonialism, and related crimes by the US government and North American citizenry of the US North American colonial state. It was also the African People's Socialist Party that organized the African National Prison Organization to fight against the colonial terror that the US prison system represents for our people. In the name of the oppressed, domestically colonized African masses, our party has attempted to initiate relations with the anti-imperialist fighting forces of the world, from Iran to Palestine and throughout the Americas, especially with the Puerto Rican and his heroic Nicaraguan people. In Asia, we have embraced the valiant Vietnamese and Filipino revolutionaries, and our solidarity with the Irish and their struggle against British imperialism has always been firm. Within the US, our party attempts to lead the African masses into an ever-deepening embrace of the struggles of the Native people, the Indio-Mexicano people, and the Mexican National Liberation Movement. Moreover, the African People's Socialist Party has initiated the founding of the African Socialist International, a single worldwide revolutionary party of African people dispersed throughout the world and in Africa, whose present wretched conditions of existence are a direct and immediate consequence of the rise of white power as parasitic capitalism. This African Socialist International could very well be the first step in the creation of a new communist international, having at its base the true majority of the world's peoples, the toilers of the colonial, neo-colonial, and so-called economically dependent peoples of the world. In 1976, the African People's Socialist Party founded the African People's Solidarity Committee, and forever laid to rest the white people's question that has plagued our struggle since the US defeated the Garvey movement first gave an artificial authority to African petty bourgeois liberalism within our movement in the US. The African People's Solidarity Committee is an organization of white people that works directly under the leadership of our party. Its subordinate relationship to our party is a reflection of the economic structure of world capitalism in general and US capitalism in particular. A capitalism that is parasitic and resting on a pedestal of slavery and colonialism, which must be overthrown in order for world progress and socialism to prevail. All these struggles and campaigns over the 19-year history of our party have been struggles and campaigns to solve the pressing problem of our revolution. Now today, we are here to solve the most fundamental problem, the problem that must be effectively addressed before there can be any significant movement toward our revolution. That problem is the counterinsurgency itself. It has taken 19 years since the founding of our party, 19 consistent, non-wavering years, but finally we are here. And our presence here today is not an accident, but the consequence of our party having assumed custody of the task to uplift the children of Africa from this North American hell of colonial wretchedness. Our presence here today is testimony that the crucial step in the defeat of the U.S. counterinsurgency, the consolidation of the Uhuru movement led by the party as a U.S.-wide movement, has begun with the founding of the National People's Democratic Uhuru movement. Nor are these empty, boastful statements. The reality of my words is to be seen in the essentially working class composition of the African participations in this meeting. And in the fact that everyone who is here is essentially is here through the independent efforts by those African workers and their revolutionary party. All the comrades who are here from California and Florida, from Indiana, Kansas, Maryland, Oklahoma, and other places are here through their own efforts to facilitate our own agenda without the contamination of white liberal unionism, any front of the Democratic Party or white nationalist leftists, or connections with the liberal African petty bourgeoisie. We are here through our own efforts, and that is a turning point in our movement, an indication that the counterinsurgency is being overcome, and that the masses of African working people are re-entering political life on our own terms. On our own terms. Today, we begin the formal process of actually building the National People's Democratic Uhuru movement organization under the leadership of our party. Although the National People's Democratic Uhuru movement is a mass organization, it is also a revolutionary organization. This is true despite the fact that there may be thousands of people who will join the National People's Democratic Uhuru movement who are not revolutionaries. The revolutionary character of NPDOM will be determined by the fact that it is led by our revolutionary party. And that every action and campaign it initiates or participates in fact, its very existence meets the strategic needs of our revolution. The National People's Democratic Uhuru movement is open to membership from any and all nationalities at the time, who are able to unite with NPDOM's constitution and meet other criteria for membership. However, our open membership does not mean that we have adopted the liberal ideology of integrationism. We reject the suggestion that our people suffer brutality and deprivation because we are not integrated with white people. Such a suggestion is a slanderous insult to the national dignity of our people, nor do we believe that our conditions of existence are due to racism, the reactionary white nationalist notions in the heads of white people that function as the ideological foundation of parasitic world capitalism. The open membership of NPDOM is based on principle. It is a membership which must be united in recognition of the objective reality that the current oppression of African people in the United States and the world springs directly from our connection with white people and parasitic capitalist white power. Our membership must be one to understand that the struggle of our people is not against the racist ideas in the heads of white people, but for Black power over our own Black lives. In short, for self-determination, for the right to combine with Africans worldwide in possession of our own self-governed democratic rights. The fact that NPDOM is under the leadership of our revolutionary party is a mark of political maturity for the oppressed, domestically colonized African workers of the US. For one thing, this means that our movement will never be trapped like the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s in limiting our struggle for democracy or human rights to those things approved of by the white ruling class and African petty bourgeoisie, or to acceptance by this system founded on our enslavement and brutalization. The leadership of NPDOM by our party also removes us from the practice of pretending that mass organizations within our oppressed communities are not informed by ideology, that they are empty of class or ideological content. We are clear. While the National People's Democratic Uhuru movement will fight to defend the national democratic rights of all African people, it is under the leadership of the African people, of the African working class, in the form of its advanced attachment, the African People's Socialist Party. Ideologically, we are African internationalists. We recognize ourselves to be a part of one African people whose conditions of existence worldwide are due to the enslavement, the rape of Africa, and the pillage of an entire world by Europe, a process that established the conditions for and existence of a parasitic capitalist world system, world order that achieves wealth and democracy for Europe, North America, and Japan at the expense of the wealth and democracy of Africans and the world's peoples. It is this ideological clarity within the Uhuru movement that allows us to understand the meaning of US aggression against the world's peoples internationally in Vietnam, Nicaragua, Panama, Grenada, Cuba, and even more recently against Iraq and the masses of Arab people. And this is what, how long ago? Iraq, you know. For in truth, despite its white nationalist ravings of supremacy, the US white ruling class and parasitic capitalist system like white power in general is absolutely dependent on our human and material resources for its very existence. Hence, US white power must deny real democracy to the world's peoples as a condition of maintaining US ruling class democracy. So, hence, US white power must deny real democracy to the world's peoples as a condition for maintaining US ruling class democracy. To defeat US parasitic white capitalism, we must struggle for real democracy. However, the leadership of the National People's Democratic Uhuru movement by the African People's Socialist Party will not allow us to forget that even democracy is determined by the question of class. While the ancient Greeks were held up by white liberal historians as the precursors of Euro-American democracy, the reality is that only 20% of the ancient Greeks were free. 80% of the Greeks were enslaved. The democracy of ancient Greeks was a democracy based on slavery. The so-called democracy of the US originated during the period of legal enslavement of captured and kidnapped Africans, and even as the native people were being actively and viciously wiped out. The civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s, although waged in the name of all the African people, only provided democracy for the African primitive petty bourgeoisie, who now run for president, lead genocidal US colonial armies, act as nominal heads of local governments, drive Mercedes-Benz, etc., at the expense of the majority of our people who now catch more hair from the US government than we did 20 years ago. The National People's Democratic Uhuru movement, like components of the liberal African petty bourgeoisie-led civil rights movement of the 60s, will be a direct action movement that will engage in acts of civil disobedience and other tactics employed by democratic mass movements worldwide. However, even as we struggle to defend the national democratic rights won by our people in the past, rights which are constantly being abrogated by the US government in the name of fighting a war against drugs, the National People's Democratic Uhuru movement will struggle to extend the question of democracy beyond the definition of the liberal African petty bourgeoisie. The highest expression of democracy is self-determination. The highest expression of democracy is self-determination. A major aspect of NPDOM mass work should revolve around our efforts to initiate an internationally supervised plebiscite, which will, as stated in point number 10 of the 10-point program of the Black Panther Party, will be held throughout the Black colony, in which only Black colonial subjects will be allowed to participate for the purpose of determining the will of Black people as to their national destiny, unquote. NPDOM should also act to challenge the 1954 Brown versus the Board of Education Supreme Court decision that allegedly desegregated the US colonial school system, but which instead codified the permanent domination of African education by colonist white people who are hostile to our interests. I mean, you think about it, they won the right to so-called desegregation based on the evidence that was taken to the Supreme Court where they showed children, black children, a choice of white dolls and black dolls, and then the African children chose white dolls, and for them that proved that black people have to be in schools with white people in order to be whatever. But the point is that who was teaching who the values that we are confronted with? The colonizer. Any place you go in the world where the colonizer dominates, the people dominated by the colonizer will emulate or try to emulate that, because that is in their brains, that's bred into everything they know, the source of real power, real beauty, real wonderful, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So how can you, doesn't make any difference what doll they choose and the final answer. So what if they pick the black doll? The white people still control the school, right? Right. So, Brown versus the Board of Education was based on the colonial assumption that African children are incapable of learning in classrooms where there are no white children. To bolster this position, pushed by the liberal African pedagogy, sociological studies were made which reveal the self-hatred of African children in segregated school situations. You know, if this premise was correct, they wouldn't be scared of China today.
Right.
Because it presupposes that white people have to be in school in China too, right? In order for the Chinese and the Japanese and other people. You understand? But this whole notion that you can't learn unless white people in the class with you. That'll make you, don't that pee you off? That'll make you wish that children were not close by so you can say something about that. However, Brown versus the Board of Education ignored the reality that the opinions of African people have of ourselves under colonial domination are due to our powerlessness to define for ourselves. The power to define Africans is in the hands of white power. The way out of this the way out of this situation has never been deeper submission to colonial control, but the struggle for power. We must state that Brown versus the Board of Education is based on the very same racist assumptions it was alleged designed to counter, and that the real way forward is through the assumption of control over Black education by the Black community itself. NPDOM must initiate a democratic counteroffensive against the U.S. counterinsurgency. We must file international and U.S.-based suits against the U.S., charging it with violation of the United Nations Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. Wow. They said the Russians told us, that's why they're trying to put me in prison now, because they said the Russians just told us to do this, right? This is from what, 1991. Within this context, we must raise up the death penalty and the death of African children for their harried and impoverished, from their harried and impoverished mothers by a U.S. colonial social service agency. You've been saying this a long time.
Yes.
We must also attack the death penalty as an issue unto itself, both in the courtroom and on the streets, exposing it for the genocidal, terroristic, legal lynching that it really is. Associated with this is the habitual offenders laws, which exist in increasing numbers of states within the U.S. They are clearly another way to terrorize our community into submission through laws which are even contrary to the U.S. Constitution, which, for example, prohibits multiple trials for the same offense. The question of reparations to African people for the value of our stolen labor and talents and the host of crimes committed against our people by the U.S. colonialist government and North American people in general must be the foundation of our demand for economic democracy. We will not attempt to put forth a laundry list of demands and campaigns that NPDOM must take on. They will reveal themselves to us in life. However, we must build an organization which will also attack the neo-colonial component of the U.S. counterinsurgency. And since the electoral process, Brother Jesse Todd, and since the electoral process is the primary method for implementing neo-colonialism within the U.S., our movement must deny the African petty bourgeoisie the free hand to utilize it with impunity to carry out a ruling class or corrupt self-serving bourgeois agenda. In order to do this, we must fight them in the arena of the electoral process by running our own candidates, and where appropriate by registering our movement as a mass party. However, two things must be kept in mind. Number one, we are not talking about symbolic campaigns. We are talking about campaigns to win elections and to affect policies governments are capable of implementing. At the top, man, Jesse. Number two, we are talking about winning campaigns on principle, on the basis of the principles and constitution of infidom, on the basis of actually massifying our demands for self-determination among the people. This means that we must learn certain skills necessary for struggling in this arena. Skills that most people in most mass movements may not have, but with many of which the Uhuru movement has acquired over the years, although not in sufficient enough quantity or quality. Serious principled struggle in this arena in defense of the national democratic rights of our people, and as part of the process to expose the U.S. counterinsurgency leading to the abrogation of many of those democratic rights, which shadow the democratic facade of the colonialist white ruling class state. One task the National People's Democratic Uhuru movement must take on in order to struggle most effectively is the task of organizing a legal defense capacity, both for our movement and for the general defense of the national democratic rights of our people. This is an important task that cannot be overstated. Historically, petty bourgeois liberals, often those who call themselves progressives or communists, have contributed to the inability of anti-colonialists like ourselves to wage an effective struggle for democracy by denying us access to lawyers who would defend our members in causes of in the colonialist courts. In fact, this has contributed to many organizations being driven underground before exhausting the democratic space for struggle. Do you know what I mean? The exhausting the democratic space for struggle? I mean, it is Black people in this country, any semblance of democracy in this country has been led by struggles for Black people, accomplished by Black people. I mean, even like the right to vote. Who paid a higher price for the right to vote? They will put me in prison for life because they said that we ran an electoral campaign and that somehow the Russians are responsible for that. But Black people, we are the ones. Nobody fought. Nobody paid the price just to vote for Joe Biden's organization than Black people. Churches were bombed, babies killed, leaders assassinated, and what have you. Mass assaults, torturous assaults, prisons filled with Black people just trying to vote. Just trying. This is supposed to be a democratic right. But they try to take away that space you want. You fight for that space because before even that little minimum space, they didn't even give you that. They just picked you up and took you somewhere like they did Emmett Till. And hang you. Like Joe Biden is showing that he's a wonderful guy now because he's making some kind of symbolic thing around Emmett Till. Well, you know, what the hell? That's what we need. Symbols will make you free. You can go on and buy a whole cart full of symbols and cook it and eat it and see what happens. The ability to utilize the democratic space has prevented many people who might otherwise join or support our democratic struggle for self-determination from doing so for fear of imprisonment and other forms of state attack. This Negro, there's one Negro that I'm constantly reminded of. Every time an African gets assassinated in a notoriously undemocratic way, it's like he hits the lottery. And so you see him and Charlatan, first in the line, and these guys are, they call him a civil rights lawyer. That's how he's referred to now, as a civil rights lawyer. And so they, your oppressor even begins to define for you who represents you in what capacity. They made Malcolm X a civil rights leader. This is how they define Malcolm. So anyway, the successful effort by NPDOM to organize a body of democratic lawyers under the leadership of our movement will open up the movement to thousands of Africans and others who recognize our need for access to the judicial process as part of our struggle. Comrades, the historic significance of our president, the thing about the democratic space is what the government will attempt to do is take that democratic space away from you, right? So that, and you need the democratic space as much as you can get. You want it. You want it. You don't want to ever surrender that democratic space because there's all kind of work that you have to do to organize the masses of people to do stuff. But if they can take that democratic space away from you, then they push you into a situation where you're doing stuff now that you shouldn't be doing now, at some later date. But you can't get to that later date because they keep smashing all the democratic space that you have. Do you understand what I'm saying? I know. Am I talking clear here?
Yes.
Yeah. That's part of the whole significance of it. Taking away your right to vote. Taking away your right to do this and that. So you're driven into a desperate kind of situation where there is no democratic space. If there's no democratic space, then you go to the next level of struggle. But what we have to do is fight for that democratic space so that we are the ones who set the terms. So when we gonna do what? We're gonna fight for that democratic space. That's what this is about today. Comrades, the historic significance of our presence here today should not be sullied by the fact that some, perhaps even within our movement, will disagree with the founding of this US-wide NPW. Perhaps some will disagree precisely because the NPW will function and exist under the leadership of our party. This should not disturb us who are here today. Comrades, sisters, and brothers, there are millions of African people within this North American hell who are looking for leadership out of this permanent state of wretchedness. Our enemies have apparently fixed to our destiny. These are the Africans locked in the housing projects which daily look more like prisons, pursued through the desolate, trash-littered streets of the African colony by homelessness, death, and special police thugs, humiliated by welfare and welfare agents who act like parole officers, and generally afflicted with all the symptoms of modern slavery. These are the Africans, millions of them, who have awaited this convention and who now await our return to our communities, where we will join them and take up the struggle to complete the Black Revolution of the 60s. All power to the people. Black power to the Uhuru. I hope this from 1991 helps to put in perspective what we are doing here today. It helps to put in perspective what the US government did when it attacked the African People's Socialist Party. It is not just attacking some work that we're doing here in St. Louis. It is attacking a strategy to overturn our relationship with colonialism. They know that's what we want. Yes. They know that's what we're fighting for. And they know that we're closer to winning more and more masses of our people there. And that's what the significance that the International People's Democratic Uhuru movement is. Yes. Everywhere you look now, people are talking about colonialism. Can't you, do you hear that? Yeah. Anyway, comrade, thank you so much.
What do I have?
No, I'm just saying.
Here I am. I'm 4 feet. But right now, I need 4 eyes. I want to thank Chairman Uhuru. You know, the other day when Chairman was on the program on the radio Monday, it hit me that every time he gets close to a mic, he sets it on fire. Yeah, Uhuru, Chairman. Now it's time for discussion. Any questions or concerns concerning the
If I may I take that? comment 4 feet?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. What I would like to do is, I went through that, it was not just a recitation of, Boston, we did this and this kind of stuff, but to show a historical continuum in terms of, and who we are, whom you are associated with. It is a part of a project for the total liberation of African people. We don't compromise in that question.
That's right.
We may act and do things a certain way at a certain time, a certain place, but it's based on how to tactics that we've developed in the process of the objective of winning total and absolute liberation. And we don't pretend to the people that we are here for anything short of that. So I want to just be able to talk about that. I'd like to talk about the paper and what you saw in the paper, if anything, how we find it to be significant. And I'd like to start off as comment, Secretary General Wade Kinshasa in this meeting.
Yes.
I'd like to start it off by, do you have anything, comment, Luigi, that you can offer? And just talk briefly between you and comment Akili and myself, and then just open it up.
Well, Chairman, President Masamela, all the guests now and the participants in the room. I just want to salute Chairman once again for this, not just presentation, but just putting these documents in place. 1991, it seems a long time, but 1991 is when this document was put out. And I remember we used to sell these documents to raise money for the organization. And it was very popular, competition over the burning street, what document will sell the most. And these documents is significant because it's here we saw a document that definitely was talking to the African working class. Because generally speaking, we have a lot of documents you see around that talks to Black people, which is true. This document also talks to Black people, but this document definitely does not sacrifice the interests of the African working class, because the struggle for democracy, as you know, is a question of acquiring state power, but it's also a question for the African working class having power over the society, over the institutions, like control the police, control of the education system, things like that. We don't just say Black people control of the education, but we say the African working class must be in the lead. This document definitely played a role in that. And this document also came into a time where, since we're talking about Africa these days, in terms of what's going on in Niger and Mali and Burkina Faso and other places like that, the president of France at the time was Francois Mitterrand, and he imposed what he believed to be the road to democracy. They used to call it National Conference. And if you want, this document was definitely, it exposed that, because what Mitterrand was saying, that democracy was a business for the African people bourgeoisie only. It means all the African people bourgeoisie in power and in a position. You got to remember, we just came out of the so-called Cold War, and under Cold War, if you did not agree with the president in place, you have to leave the country. People were chased out of the countries throughout Africa. And what Mitterrand wanted is a reconciliation, just like you saw in South Africa, reconciliation between the apartheid white rulers and the leaders of the so-called African National Liberation Movement, like the ANC and others. So Mitterrand basically was able to impose that. So everywhere you went in Africa, particularly French-speaking countries, including Congo, which is no French colony, but French-speaking countries, you had national conferences everywhere where the sectors of African people bourgeoisie met and discuss what democracy was and what to do and things like that. And the African working class was left out because first, we didn't have an organization to lead those struggles. Also, we didn't have a document to say democracy not only has to be the defeat of the colonialism, but democracy also has to be a defeat of the African bourgeoisie, so that African workers and poor peasants can have a democratic space to build a free and a united Africa. So this document definitely help us to develop a class consciousness or to consolidate a class consciousness at the time. And another thing that was critical with this document, the question of drugs. It's a big issue when you're in Europe. You have just this drive against drive of war on drugs, and when they say war on drugs, they mean war on white people, on African people, on African working class in particular. And you read this document, and you definitely understood it's part of the counterinsurgency, because a lot of people might have come to the counterinsurgency because the assassination of the historical Black Power movement and the historical leaders like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. But to sum up, that the war on drugs is a part of the counterinsurgency that was absolutely great. You begin to see what's really the question of drugs was about, why drugs is always in the Black community, why what's happening in France, what's happening in Holland, what's happening in Britain, they all were part of a counterinsurgency. So you begin to see the universality of a counterinsurgency. So this document was key. And also what's going on in Africa today. People might not know, and all Black cities, African cities right now, from South Africa to Senegal, Guinea, all those places, drugs is everywhere. All kind of drugs in Africa, these days. So counterinsurgency is there, and you hear people saying France must go, but you don't see anyone who can sum up, war on the counterinsurgency, war on drugs is counterinsurgency, and the leading chief of counterinsurgency war in Africa is the United States government. So this document helps also to cement that, to make Africans to realize in reality, the war has to be won, yes, against French colonizers, Portuguese colonizers, but we have to win against the United States colonialism. Which is not just a question of being defeated inside the United States. We have to be defeated in Africa and elsewhere where we are, Haiti and those places. So this document, contributed enormously in our developments to understand that. And he exposed the U.S. If you outside the United States, people have to know, if you don't live in the United States, if you live in Africa or in Europe, you have to know the impact of the US propaganda outside the US is massive, to the point that people are seduced by the United States democracy. People take that as the greatest example of democracy. But with this document, we're equipped to see that, US went to Somalia. That was 1991. And this document also captured, basically helps us to see that the United States cannot be involved in a war for democracy in Africa, And as you know, the African Somali kicked the house of the United States. They couldn't stay there. But the point is, for the first time, we can say, when we look at the documents coming from the US, is not talking to us about something that happened in the past, but the documents talking to us about what's happening now and what we need to do today so we can complete the Black Revolution. So it really standardized the understanding of the defeat of the Black Revolution, that what you saw, the overthrow of Lumumba and Kwame Nkrumah and the others, and also the overthrow of the Black Power movement. They were just part of the one movement, and the United States was the key responsible for defeating, our movement of the 60s. So these really played, this document was essential. It played a fundamental role in just getting us basically to understand that. And the last thing I might say is just the good thing also about this document, to help the African working class, the African, colonized people, to begin to develop a sense of self, like the African working class having a sense of self. you will not see documents, even today is rare, where African working class is being developed, is being addressed as a class for itself. You don't see that. You can go many countries in Africa, you won't see that. In Europe, you will not see that. Africa, working class is always an appendix, either of the white working class if you're in Europe, or the appendix of African people bourgeoisie. And reading this document, it made it clear the struggle for democracy is, yes, it's a struggle to complete the Black Revolution, is true. It's the struggle to end colonialism, is true, but it's the struggle to raise the stature of the African working class. That was clear, and that was innovative. It was an innovation. For just anyone who is I'm not sure if you're in the US in the same impact if you're outside, but for me, being outside, it was just, it was brilliant. So you can now be, assured you're fighting for the Black liberation, and you're also fighting for the African working class. There is no contradiction between the two. So the struggle against opportunism is sharpened. So you know when you can unite with African people or not. So basically, this document, played that big role. Maybe one thing, probably I'm going to stop here. Although question of democratic space, you heard Chairman talking about it a lot, because I grew up listening to discussions around me in Africa, even Europe, but in Africa, generally speaking, the struggle around democratic space was not something people talked about. It was just to be a revolutionary, you go pick up the guns and get the neo-colonialists out. So a lot of people, couldn't get involved in the struggle because they didn't know how to basically fight for democratic space. And I think this is a critical point. It is a very important point, particularly at this very moment. The African working class can intervene in the struggle to complete the Black Revolution and also to raise its own interest as a class for itself. This document, this struggle for democratic space is a fundamental part of the struggle. So these are some of the things I just wanted to talk about. And, as I say, that this document, it could have been written yesterday, and it's still valid as it was at the time, particularly in the time Africa is fighting about. So I appreciate just being part of this discussion. So yes, well.
Get to a comment and Q as well, but one thing I wanted to point out is that the comment, the lady was saying how the issue of the struggle for democratic space was not something that was generally recognized in Africa. That's been true, generally speaking, but I think a difference may exist in that, generally speaking, in Africa, we had not come to the best we didn't have the ability to come to the best revolutionary conclusions in certain ways. I say Africa, but it was generally true. For example, Nkrumah had attempted to initiate a movement that would unite all of Africa. And he gave great support for the national liberation movement, armed struggle that was happening in various places in Africa. That distinguished him from a lot of the petty bourgeois that was lining up to become heads of state in these different entities. But the fact is that, he really promoted really fought for uniting all of Africa, which is a real genuine struggle for democratic space. It's a democratic struggle. Let Africa take charge of its own affairs. Let's come together, use these democratic institutions to do that. But then what happened is the colonizers attacked viciously, and sometimes using neo-colonial forces to do that. They overthrew Nkrumah, they killed Lumumba. I mean, this is democratic space that Lumumba was attempting to use, the electoral process that right there in Congo. He surprised and shocked them because he wasn't even supposed to win that election. They had the election already been rigged against Lumumba. It had already been rigged against Nkrumah in Ghana. So they were not supposed to win these elections, but they shocked them because they did it like an all-African, as they dismissed all of these ethnic, groups as primary and dealt with the whole people, and so they won those elections. But when Nkrumah was overthrown, Was he in China when he was overthrown? Where was he? Oh, China? I know he was going to Vietnam for something.
Yeah, Vietnam. He was negotiating for peace in Vietnam, Chairman.
Yeah, and he was in.
Yeah.
So when he was overthrown, everybody in the Convention People's Party, his organization, everybody left him and went back to Ghana, where the neo-colonialists who participated in overthrow. The only people who didn't leave were the people who were on payroll. And Lumumba was overthrown. We saw remnants of Lumumba supporters and things like that were trying to, make revolutionary struggle, et cetera. But my point, generally speaking, is that we were able to attack this democratic space, but we were not prepared to make the class struggle within the struggle for national liberation and to lead, toward the working people and peasants taking power at that time. Yeah, that's all I was.
Uhuru Chairman, and SG Loazy, and I really, really appreciate this really opening up the whole convention process that's taking place, today and tomorrow, because I think that it really captures, this document could have been titled what today's theme of the convention is, which is deepen the counteroffensive, complete the Black Power movement. This time we will win. And, just recognizing that in this document here, that was the intent behind this document. This time we will win. Summing up the counterinsurgency of the 1960s, of the Black Power movement, the Black Revolution that had taken place, and establishes the basis for an organization like the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement. And just really want to unite with SG Loazy's observation, especially around the class question and the character of this, how you are defining the trajectory, the struggle for African workers, and making this distinction between the African petty bourgeoisie, these different movements and formations, and how they help, help participate in the destruction of the Black Revolution, how they emerge as a consequence of the defeat of the Black Revolution. Just a couple of things I wanted to point out about this document, because I'm one of those forces which you would say has entered into history, into this period, not having really the experience of the Black Revolution of the 1960s. But this right here is informative and instructs what it is that we have to do in the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement. It establishes what that work has to look like, the character of the organization itself, how it has to and has rooted itself in the masses of African workers and bringing them into this process, not keeping leadership and the ability to participate in a revolutionary process away from the masses of African people, but opening the doors and allowing them to come into this process under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. And obviously has extended itself internationally, and we'll be seeing that in reports from the African continent. And just being able to show what the possibilities are for different types of, campaigns and just struggles that we are engaged in. And I really, really appreciate how the question of democracy is defined. And it makes the distinction that, the colonizer's democracy will not ever be democracy for the colonized. It cannot be. That colonizer democracy came into being with the stripping away of any ability for African people to exercise democracy. And how you said, there was no democracy in what was feudal Europe, prior to the assault on Africa and the rest of the world. There was no this concept of democracy today. This came into existence through taking it away, robbing it for African people. And it also goes to the point of how you say democracy, real democracy, freedom, true democracy, self-determination for Black people is illegal based on the democracy of the colonizer in the US. So the US has set up a democracy to make it impossible for Africans to ever really achieve or express that without ending up in prison, without being assassinated, et cetera, but you created a strategy now where we're able to, fight to achieve that democratic space as a part of a process of creating true democracy through the destruction of colonialism. And that is so profound. And just the last thing that I think that I would be able to even, add to this really incredible discussion in this document is the fact that we say a lot ever since the FBI and US government assault on the party, this latest iteration of it, rather, in 2022, that we have all these documents, all these presentations, et cetera, that can serve as evidence. We submit this as a part of the discovery, as a thing that we discuss inside of a trial. And this is one of those documents. And just a couple of places where I noted the genocide petition, the running for office, that this wasn't just some, this was stuff you had already put in motion, you had already been doing, for decades, even prior to even coming to this convention, had already been involved in that process. And it just proves that the party, this movement has been on the same trajectory, has never changed. The line, our position, our objective has never changed. And that we can see that now translated into this new period, the same kind of struggles emerging, the same kind of heightened military, with the flashbang grenades and, the assault rifles on the July 29th of last year, the threat of imprisonment and all these kinds of things. We're seeing this process now intensifying because they're experiencing now a struggle, like you said, it's on shaky foundation. That's evidence, it's on shaky foundation. They come to us, in pre-dawn, carrying out this raid and then creating these fabricated charges, trying to win, this war of ideas in terms of convincing people that this has something to do with other than what it's always exampled, which is trying to defeat Black people from being able to be free. That's what that is. We say this represents a historical continuum of this movement. It also shows the historical continuum of the colonizer and colonialism and working to destroy the Black Power movement. And we can say without a shadow of doubt, it's not about Russia, it's not about any of this other stuff. It's about what African people have been struggling to do ever since we were forcibly brought here and dispersed around the world, which is to fight for our freedom and liberation. And that comes in direct, contention with how, this whole social system functions. And so it's just really profound. And we have to see this document reflected in the current period that we are organizing in. And what our responsibility is in this period to deepen that counteroffensive, to win and bring masses of African workers into this process and win unity from colonized people and the anti-colonial demand under the leadership, of the African working class, which is what we're seeing today. So just very profound, really appreciate it, and it sets the tone for everything that we're going to be talking about at this convention. Uhuru.
I think that's extremely important. And on September 28th, a few days, but not too many days from now, I will be going before federal court in Tampa, Florida, where because the court has agreed to hear arguments, we call for these charges against us to be dismissed. We filed a brief calling for the dismissal of these charges and saying something about the history that of our movement, these things they're charging us for. I mean, historically, we have been engaged in these struggles, and they see there's a strategic basis in it. You can't tell me all of a sudden, after being involved in this movement for down to 60 years, doing this, that Southerners, the Russians who paid us to do this. This is from 1991. And then, of course, you find 1982, 9 years prior to that, the World Tribunal of Reparations for African People using the same international law around the Genocide Convention. And so it's obviously, that has nothing to do with law. Except law being the opinion of the white ruling class, the colonial white ruling class, and they change their opinions anytime it's important for them. And that's even before they had, it's I'm thinking this guy's Clarence Thomas and Jenny, but and also I think it's important that we recognize So here we talk about a strategic process. And a lot of people have been drawn into political life by stuff with Trump being coming to political life, but they saw this, they saw that. Somebody got shot down the neighborhood or mistreated in school, and so they became radicalized through that process and rah. But the fact is that we've been involved in this same trajectory. Some people have been brought into these struggles without even knowing the origin of the struggle themselves. Like we got a mayor here in St. Louis who has got a reparations commission. And this is the same St. Louis where the local police collaborated with the FBI, right, to attack my home and to attack the other comrades here in the movement. On the one hand, this is the organization that made reparations a household word.
Right.
There was no mass movement. There never was a mass movement for reparations until we created it in 1982. Didn't exist. Didn't say there weren't people who were doing reparations work, but there was no mass, there was not even the assumption of the masses would play a role in on this question until we organized that in 1982, November 13, 14, Brooklyn, New York, 1982. And it brought all these people in reparations. We were called a lunatic fringe when we first started doing reparations work. Just like some people now say we work for the Russians, we were crazy then too. Now some of the people are working with the same government. They take the reparations demand that we put forth. We had our own program that would deal with the question of reparations here in St. Louis. Now the mayor has a reparations program, she says. But look at the condition. You've been here in St. Louis. Some of us live here, have lived here for a long time. What you got to do is drive through a startling. Yeah. They say that we somehow working with the Russians around Ukraine. I don't have to fire Ukraine. I can go out my door and see bombed out situations all over North St. Louis. So it just doesn't make any sense, obviously. And the thing is that I think that we point out too, is that here, that when you talk about national liberation, you're talking about the whole nation, right? The nation is comprised not just of workers, right? There's workers at petty bourgeois forces. We call them primitive petty bourgeoisie because they're not full form, because they're not connected to capitalism in the same way. But also, there are artisans, there are culture workers, there are all kinds of people part of a nation. We say national liberation. National liberation doesn't mean the same thing to every one of these groups. The petty bourgeoisie can have national liberation. Look at what you see all over Africa. Them Negroes got national liberation. Some of those Negroes just got overthrown, like in Mali and some other place. That was their national liberation. But the masses of people catching hell because the masses don't have their own working class revolutionary organization to lead the struggle for national liberation. The struggle for national liberation that includes all the classes must be led ultimately by the revolutionary African working class. It has to have its own revolutionary capacity to do that. It has to have a revolutionary party that functions as the advanced detachment, the advanced guard, the general staff. What do I mean, general staff? I'm talking the ones who would come in and then and do things like create a Black Power blueprint, to organize, they would create the farmers market, they would do all this kind of stuff to give general direction to a revolutionary movement. That will create an NPDM that allow masses of people to come in and participate in their own liberation struggle. And so to take the national liberation struggle where it needs to be, it has to be under the leadership of the African working class. The African working class cannot lead unless it has its own organization. Do you see what I'm saying? You can call yourself a leader, this and that, I'm leading this and that, I'm a revolutionary. How do you make your revolution function? How does your revolution materialize itself in the real world? What strategic objectives guide your revolution? What is the philosophy that leads your revolution? What is that allow your revolution to have long-term aims as opposed to being some kind of opportunity thing that swings this way and that way depending on which way the wind is blowing? See what I'm saying? Yeah. So the thing is that what we say is that we've been building for this and our trajectory has been to make the revolution. And so that's the general objective we're fighting for. And when we say make a revolution, we also recognize that we are part of a much bigger thing than St. Louis or Chicago. We are a nation that has been forced at gunpoint. You know, and I like to mention this because people, anyway. History for some people, this is the literal truth. History for some people, they were thrust into history, they were given birth, their consciousness, their brains, their assumption around the whole world is tied into colonial slavery. They didn't exist as peoples. Was no such thing as a white man before colonial slavery. Was no such thing as Europeans before colonial slavery. It was colonialism and slavery that gave birth to this force. So their consciousness began as enslavers, as colonizers. I'm not picking on them. You understand? This is just where their history begins. So when you talk about America, America has existed, you know, for history. American history is like the blink of an eye in terms of African history. So here they just got here. And so you take away the history, their history as Americans, you've obliterated them. They don't exist no more. You understand what I'm saying? That's where their history comes from. It starts right here with killing indigenous people, stealing their land, enslaving African people. There's no such entity. There's no such thing as an American. Yes. It doesn't exist before. Yes. So this is where its whole existence is. So you talk about making some kind of a revolutionary struggle here. You destroy the existence of whiteness, of white people, of Americans. No such thing as an American once you do that. You have all this territory they have stolen and named it for a white man. Yeah. Anyway, so a point that I would make is that even when the struggle for national liberation, this class struggle that happens, that's what the NAACP represents. That's why Du Bois fought against Garvey, you know, even though they came and got him too, right? This class struggle that occurs even within the struggle for national liberation. Who leads this movement? The African petty bourgeoisie cannot lead it. It cannot lead it to form a conclusion. Why? Because the African petty bourgeoisie has very narrow interests. It's only the African working class that cannot survive, that cannot move forward, and it's the whole thing is taken on. That's why the African working class can have a strategic approach that will embrace the interests of the whole nation, but the petty bourgeoisie can't do that. Right. The petty bourgeoisie can do it in the name of the nation while embracing only the interests of the petty bourgeoisie. Yeah. And they do it as militants sometimes. Yeah. Militants. You know, I mean, I remember how Sharpton used to get everybody to militantly march down to this place and they get on their knees and do a militant prayer. You understand? And they tire everybody out too. You get so tired. Every time you look up, oh, another big demonstration. And then you got the tag team of Crump and Trump. I mean. So the other thing I think is important to remember, the point we try to make here is a liberal colonizer is a colonizer. Yes. You understand? Yes. A liberal colonizer is a colonizer. A Joe Biden colonizer is a colonizer. Right. A Donald Trump colonizer is a colonizer. The Democratic Party is a colonial organization. The Republican Party is a colonial organization. So what they do is give you a choice of this colonizer versus that colonizer. Yeah. And they do not allow you to seek your own choice. Yeah. Right? Your own choice will be awakened in the night at 5 o'clock in the morning with flashbang grenades and threats of imprisonment or death like they did with Fred Hampton. Yes. 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 So, and then I just want to say this last thing. You know, we're looking at all the struggle that's happening around national liberation, people trying to break out this colonial death grip. I was doing an interview with some brothers, was that Kenya? I think that was Kenya. And they're a member of an organization that used to be prominent on college campuses in this country, among other places. And they, like so many other people, have so much hope around BRICS. And, you know, the Russian and Chinese moving this way and that way. And all that stuff is important in terms of it breaking up, fracturing this whole, how this whole political economy of the world is articulating itself. But that's not the same thing as saying Africans gonna be free.
Right.
You understand?
Yes.
And that's the issue that we've been trying to win. And because the brother, he was telling me that I helped him to understand that this, just this being wrapped around multipolarity, because that's the line that, comes from Putin and comes from China, what have the Russian, Chinese, and others fighting for a multipolar world. And I'm not interested in a multipolar world. I mean, I unite with this effort because I know what this means. This is an attack against the existing iteration of colonial world power. So you want to see that fractured up. So if somebody say, okay, I support that, but that's not our ultimate aim. Our ultimate aim is not to have a world that's comprised of dominant capitalists and colonialists versus minor capitalists and colonialists and all spread through. I would like to destroy the system based on colonialism, and no matter what kind of polarity, there ain't no polarity. It's colonialism versus the destruction of colonialism. As the colonialism is a mode of production that has to be destroyed. There will be no freedom for anybody on earth. The whole world economy was given birth to by a colonial slave. So anyway, just wanted to say that. I've talked too much. But I think it was important for us to look at this document, and it says something about who we are. We need a mass movement of African working people. We need a mass movement that speaks to the democratic rights of the African nation, the anti-colonial rights of the African nation. We need to be able to have a mass movement that does not depend on the Democratic Party, that does not have to rely on their definition of what democracy is, et cetera. We need a mass movement that can say, you see, even with all the black petty bourgeois forces, and they're trying to say, what has Biden done? Well, Biden has done a thing now, he said, honoring Emmett Till. I mean, when have you heard them talking about the theft of our babies that goes on right now with this CPS and all this other kind of stuff? When do you hear one of them, not a single one of them, talk about the damn gentrification that's destroying our communities throughout this country? When have you heard one of them protest the economic embargo they got on Zimbabwe and other places? Not a single word from them. They can get away with it because they speak from the interests of the petty bourgeoisie, which is the interest, finally, of the bourgeoisie and not the interest of the working class. The African working class, the anti-colonial forces, we have the power to do that, and we have to be organized to do that. We have to be united to do that, and we have to have an organization that can put forth mass organization. This is the first time in history that a revolutionary African party was able to create such a mass organization, create our own mass organizations. Anyway. There's people who want to comment.
Okay.
Yeah.
This mic up here, please.
Yeah, please step up to the mic.
Brother.
So just
30 seconds. Uhuru,
Go ahead, come in. Yeah.
okay, I just wanted to say I very much appreciate everything that you've been saying. I'm very glad to be here. And as you were talking and you talk about Biden and Emmett Till and all of that, what people should understand is that the Biden administration, under the Department of Justice, under the Biden administration, closed the investigation into Carolyn Bryant, who was the one who murdered Emmett Till,
Yeah.
closed it, said they could find nothing wrong and allowed her to just die out in peace. But in the meantime, the ones that Department of Justice had issue with was Chairman Omali Yeshitela, Penny Hess, Jesse Neville. They got problems with them.
Yeah.
And also, I just wanted to say that I think as I'm listening to this, that one of the things, because we have to look at where we are in this point in time, and some of the generation that have come before us, some of them may have made, some honest errors or whatever in terms of how they thought that this should go. But our generation, people living in this day and age, we ain't got no excuses. We done seen every everything implemented and fair. There's no excuse for being loyal to the Democratic Party or the Republicans. There's just none. And even on the continent of Africa, we have a new history that they didn't have before.
Yeah.
And for us, there's just no excuses. That's why we're doing it.
Can we hear exchange with two heads before, it's the last one, is that all right, President? I know we over.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's, yeah. No, but.
Uhuru Chairman, I just wanted to say that presentation and that speech was as electrifying today as it was when I first heard it 32 years ago at the founding convention of the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement. It's an honor to be here. I just want to say that first. I want to salute President Masamela and you, Uhuru. And I wanted to say just quickly that document is also core and essential for white people. Because this white left that you just described as part of the colonizer nation in this colonial mode of production in which white people live totally at the expense of African people that the chairman has fought for and won. It has the ability as white leftists or part of the colonizer nation to just treat the African Revolution as a marginal question, as opposed to showing us the way to revolution in this period in the world under the leadership of the African Revolution. And I think that, all of these questions of the, of the African working class leading, the question that self-determination for African people is the highest form of democracy, is self-determination for African people. The question of political power for African people, this is in the interest of all white people, because the colonial question is the central question. And that shows that in every possible way and the way forward. So I just, really want to thank you for that and for your leadership and fighting for this period that you're talking about, this critical period and moment in history. So thank you.
Uhuru comrades. All right, fist up. Fist up. Uhuru. I would like to bring you now culture, which is one of Impedim's St. Louis members, Mr. Artemis Caldwell.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. Uhuru, everybody. And yes, I got a couple of poems I'm gonna do for y'all, and hopefully y'all like it. I don't do a lot of times. Power, something my people have little of. Freedom, they are too ignorant to receive freely, believing everything comes with a price or a struggle. Nothing is ever handed to them for free. Gotta pull yourself up by the bootstraps for forgetting Tim's don't come with no bootstraps. I'm not your trending topic or Instagram model. You can't make up my hustle. I'm too authentic. Been running through the mud with Harriet, Martin, and Malcolm, with rifle, peace, and history on our back. I ain't talking talk, I'm slinging facts at you. I ain't nobody's porch monkey. I can't sit still. By the ballot, bullet, badge, or pipeline. They got a system to catch me, so I gotta keep running. Hurdling over dead bodies that resemble high school classmates, traded diplomas for tombstones. Essays became my eulogy. The streets test our testimony. We ain't posed for our beach, baby. It was just picture day like that. You're a black boy turned hustler. You'll never see a U-Haul trailing behind a hearse, so you can't take it with you. You might as well travel pocket light. I'm talking hood heavy. Eyes forward, no looking back. Feet don't fail me now. Because I'm still found guilty walking or running on the wrong side of the street of Mud Aubrey. When justice is in the right hands and change reminds you of Tulsa, Oklahoma bombings, and you remember we were Rosewood before we were concrete roses, where we hold the block down, coffin tight, better than our promises, keeping quiet, hoping police don't bust into our house, kill us by mistake or on purpose, and all they gotta say is wrong person, wrong place. We on the table. You've proven it's not safe outside or in the house. How do you expect us to pull ourselves up by the bootstraps when we ain't got time to tie them or a safe place to put them on our feet? You probably would rather me hang myself off this tree on the side of these Timbs you selling. Swag like strange fruit. Cologne smell like black bodies blowing in southern breeze. Realize that the celebration for this life, which feels like a marathon, only to be translated by a dash on my tombstone, marking the day I started and the day they kept me in the field. They're trying to brand my halo. I'm not paying attention to their symbols, but I'm not your Rodney King hashtag, remember what they did to me, I mean us, all for one and one for not. When we are being trampled by the same boots with laces in them, how do they expect us to get back up? How? Some of my people are starting to understand. Freedom. They are still too ignorant to receive freely, believing everything comes with a price or a struggle. Nothing is ever handed to them for free. Gotta pull yourself up by the bootstraps with the getting Tim's coming on bootstraps. Action. That was Harriet Martin Malcolm's Tim's. Okay. Stand right here though.
Yeah.
Alright, cool. This next one is called Study Shows. So yeah, it's one of my favorites. Epigenetics, the study of changes in organisms caused by modification of gene expression rather than altering the genetic code itself. In other words, instead of messing with my DNA, you traumatically impose your traumas onto my ancestors, injecting generational traumatizing fear into their bloodstream. Short version, white people be black people so bad that their kids couldn't forget it. Example, the laughing girl. We've all seen a black person enjoying themselves, a good laugh or two. Hell, I'm black, guilty of smiling, grinning more oftentimes than not. Hell, I've been seen fleeing the scene if extremely tickled. But did you know, during slavery, slaves weren't allowed to laugh on the plantation, so as an act of defiance, they would seek out a barrel to put their heads in to contain their laughter. I remember my grandfather saying, before every joke, this one gonna shoulders began to hunch over, spine began to curl into the fetal position, arms protecting vital arteries, remembering how a knee slapper sounded a lot like a gavel. See how a joke could literally go too far, have you in tears hurting from the inside out. See, epigenetics is the study of changes in organisms caused by modification rather than altering the genetic code itself. See, ain't it funny how they try to run away from their history, but remember the punishment, punchline, no pun intended, but see how a joke could literally go too far, but reel you back in? America has a funny saying, give me liberty or give me death. But what if I got the joke a little too soon to realize that the loophole was a perfect fit around my neck? That the punchline was code word for my lifeless body laying across the stage for all to see. See, the real king of comedy was Emmett Till. He showed us that we're all here for a good time and not a long time. And see, Steve Harvey got the game and ran with it, took Family Matters and turned it into Family Feuds, got rich off of guessing which one of us had the biggest laughter to make us tone deaf. See, they'll snatch the words right out of your mouth, leave your body defenseless, they'll confuse your SOS for an LOL and say, are you knocking? They'll confuse your SOS for LOL and say, are you not entertained? This is not what you signed up for. You've been auditioning for this role for years now, 400 to be exact. who else can bomb and make a suicide look rehearsed? You still ain't learned to set up to a great punchline. First, strip them down to nothing. Capitalize off their pain and suffering. Turn them into a livestock for real. See, they'll never realize that the plantation has moved into their living room. They'll never realize that the plantation has moved into their living room. See, call it a sitcom. Watch them drop dead, fall out their seats, laugh they butt out. See, funny money is easy to collect on. See, epigenetics, the study of changes of organisms caused by modification rather than altering the genetic code itself. In other words, laughter is not the best medicine. I don't know who said that stupid thing. But when I find you, I'm gonna give you a taste of your own medicine. And then we'll see. And then we'll see. And we'll see who get the last laugh.
This being your very first Impedum conference, we will honor you with the official Impedum shirt. How come people get that shirt? Y'all want that shirt? That shirt is $20. And you can get that at the Impedum table. Not right now, but you can get it at the Impedum table, okay? All right. Thank you, comrade. Last Saturday, Comrade Artemis and myself held a Speak Out, Speak Up event, poetry event. It was amazing. Some of our members came, Comrade King, Comrade Jesse, Comrade Rage, Angelica. It was an amazing event. I'm telling you, it was good. It was good. When we get the video, it will be in the hands of Ikile to use as she sees fit. Okay.
Solidarity.
Okay, comrade. Is Jesse gone? He went out.
He's here. And we got the Green Party.
Okay. Now, comrades, we are about to move into our solidarity statements. And we're gonna start with the All African Women's Organization. Is yesterday coming up? Oh, okay. Then we'll do the All African People Development and Empowerment Project, which I am going to read the statement from Comrade Dr. Aisha Field. I am a member of All African People, ABDEP, and I am coordinator for Project Black Unk for the past year. That's not the solidarity statement. But I would like to say that in this last year, we have been working with, well, Project Black Unk been working with COVID. And I want to say today that COVID is still alive and is still available. So if you feel ill, or if you feel like you have sinus or cold, please wear a mask to protect yourself and those around you. Okay, Uhuru. Where's my glasses? Uhuru, on behalf of the membership and leadership of the All African Peoples Development and Empowerment Project, I want to salute this 2023 convention of the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement. Established in 2007 by the All African People Socialist Party, AFDEP is one of the mass organizations of the Uhuru Movement and one of 3 nonprofit initiated by the party. AFDEP mission is to collectivize the skills of African people around the world in order to build concrete community-based development programs in the area of agriculture, education, and healthcare. AFDEP is a strategy of the African Revolution created in order to deny the colonizer nation access to African skills by winning unity with the understanding that African skills belong to and must be used for the benefit of African and Africa and African people in our struggle to self-determination and self-government. As sister organizations, both birthed by the African People's Socialist Party, AFDEP and our entire membership are invested in the success of this convention and of Deepening as a whole. We salute the leadership of Chairman Omali Yeshitela. We salute the chairman for developing the theory and practices of African internationalism, which guides the work of Deepening, AFDEP, and the other organizations, departments, and institutions of the Uhuru movement. We salute Deepening, our sister organization, the primary mass organization of the Uhuru movement, for its long history as a fighting organization for the African working class. As the organization that meets African people at our political door and teaches us if we are willing to how to fight. I want to salute the leadership of President Masamela Odom, the international president of Deepening, for his leadership and for his daily struggle to win the African working class to their fighting organization. Recognizing that we must bring the masses of African people into action, political life, and that the African working class must lead. I want to salute the Deepening International Executive Committee and all the members and leaders around the world who are daily working to unite the African nation, using Deepening as one of the most important vehicles for forwarding the African revolution. I look forward to the political summation, presentations, discussions, and deliberations that will happen over this weekend and unite with the significance of building Deepening during this tenuous period of resistance. Uhuru, Dr. Aisha Field. Next, we will have a solidarity statement from the Universal African People Organization, Comrade Zaki Barui.
Black power.
Black power.
Power to the people.
Power to the people.
Assalamu alaikum. Let me, first and foremost, in terms of my solidarity remarks, Salute Brother Odom, the chair of Impendum. Salute Brother O'Malley Yasatella, founder of the African People's Socialist Party. I'm here to offer solidarity remarks, and I'm offering them because it just makes common sense in this day and age, that our people support the work of Impendum and the African People's Socialist Party. What we're living through right now in this time is a continuation of the horrors of colonialism, capitalism, imperialism. Just most recently, and that horror is personified many times by a sick, demented police force to maintain the power of the capitalists. And I say this coming most recently just from Jackson, Mississippi area. I don't know how many of you have heard of this particular incident in Jackson that took place, I think, on January 24th, where it was a goon squad out of Rankin County Police Department of Mississippi that acknowledged themselves as a goon squad. And they had heard about or rumored that two Black men were sexually involved with white women. So they raided the home of one of them. And as they raided the home on the pretext of drugs, and you know the drug warfare, someone had said, is just a pretense to have mass incarceration and the killing of our people. But as they raided the home, they terrorized and tortured these two brothers for hours and hours. And how was the torture? First, it was waterboarding, where they poured water, milk, grease onto their faces. Then they had sex toys and sexually molested them. But not satisfied with that, one of the officers put a pistol in one of the brothers' mouth, pulled the trigger. But by the grace of the Creator, they survived. And the word got out into the community that what had taken place. And so to that end, through the work of, and we have to salute people who are out there trying to make it happen, Malik Zulu Shabazz of the Black Lawyers for Justice, and another good dear brother of mine, Kareem Mohammed of the local OLC of Greenville. That was brought, the case was brought forward. And out of that, those 6 officers, surprisingly, shockingly, the federal government did get involved and they charged them and they pled guilty, all 6. That was absolute shock. I just use that example because those beasts that I call them, just like I call this system as a beast.
That's what it is.
Let's just be very graphic with what we're dealing with. And it's been proven over and over and over and over again their beastly behavior. Even when you look at that pre-dawn morning raid on the chairman's home and the other offices, of all those that they say were trying to overturn the United States government during the January 6th, raid on the Capitol, did you hear any pre-dawn raid on those folks who actually physically attacked the building? The hypocrisy of these beasts. The hypocrisy of when they say we're for democracy, and then you have the governor down in Florida just take out an elected prosecutor who happened to be a person of African descent. Hypocrisy. When they say they speak out against, this government speak out against coups, but then they have historical amnesia because this government led the coup against the Chilean president, Allende, had their filthy hands in the death of Lumumba, worked to overthrow Nkrumah. How dare you? So it's just common sense. Common sense to stand with people in a movement that speaks truth to power, to make a change for the masses of our people who suffer 24/7 because of this beast. So, Brother O'Malley and I, many times we have different conversations. And I always say this, I can't help it, because in our lifetime, we want to see an end to this.
Yes.
So we have to intensify the movement.
Yes.
We have to have armies. I'm not talking about just a mass movement. We have to have some armies to work to overturn and put an end to a system that, as we had on the front page of one of our newspapers, I call them vampires, political vampires. And as in the old movies of Dracula, how did you get rid of a vampire?
Stake through the heart.
You put a stake through the heart. Bottom line, in my opinion, that's what needs to happen for the salvation of our people.
That's right.
And humanity.
Yes.
So I'm proud, as head of the Universal African Peoples Organization, in the spirit of the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, in the spirit of Muammar Gaddafi,
Yeah.
in the spirit of Huey Newton,
Well.
in the spirit of Samara Machel, in the spirit of Nat Turner, Harriet Tubman,
Well.
that we stand in solidarity with Impendum and the African People's Socialist Party. Power to the people.
Uhuru. Is Comrade Jesse Todd?
He was.
Okay. The Green Party, Lauren from the St. Louis Green Party. Uhuru. Okay.
Uhuru. St. Louis Green Party would like to thank President Matsunella and the chairman. The Green Party of St. Louis stands in solidarity with the International People's Democratic Uhuru movement and the fight for self-determination of African and colonized people. We recognize African internationalism and African people's right to community control of education, healthcare, self-defense, housing, and land, and support Impedum in their demand to end neocolonialism and capitalism. We unite with Impedum in their call for reparations to African people, for the release of colonized political prisoners, for the removal of U.S. and other colonial military forces from Africa, and for an immediate withdrawal of the terroristic police and military troops in African communities. The Green Party of St. Louis joins Impedum and the African People's Socialist Party in their call to end the oppression of free speech of African people and supports your leadership fighting for the freedom of all colonized people around the world.
And now, we thank the Green Party. We would like to bring up Comrade Penny Hess with the solidarity statement from African People's Solidarity Committee.
Uhuru. I just really want to salute this incredible day today. Chairman Omali Yeshitela, I want to salute President Matsamela Odom and the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement and that incredible paper, Chairman, that you read earlier that just leads the way for the entire world to be free and liberated. I want to salute this convention. It is an honor to be here. And I want to give the greatest salutes to my leadership, our leadership in the African People's Solidarity Committee, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, who has fought like hell for the last 60 years and in particular in this last year to push back the state, put the state on trial, to intensify this movement and to bring about again where the struggle of the colonized people is the main agenda of this planet. So this is a critical moment in history. I unite with the chairman, and the chairman has played a key and leading role in bringing us to this critical history. I want to, just say very quickly that I am honored to be the chair of the African People's Solidarity Committee, the organization of white people that was formed by Chairman Omali Yeshitela 47 years ago now. In 1976, I was very much honored to be there and to be in this very historic formation in which a white organization for the first time was formed by a revolutionary party of the African working class that was working very clearly and determinedly to unify and liberate Africa and all African people everywhere around the world, and created the white organization as part of the strategy to win the liberation of Africa and African people. So this is not, APSC it's not a favor, we're not allies, we're not something that we created to support the African Liberation or the African People's Socialist Party. We were created by the party as part of the strategy to send voices of African internationalism, white people speaking Black power behind enemy lines as an extension of the African Revolution, and uniting with and bringing with us the work to organize other white people to understand what the chairman calls the colonial mode of production, that all white people sit on the pedestal and have everything that we have, from our resources, our social wealth, our inheritances, our property, stolen property, based on stolen African human beings, on the stolen labor of African human beings, on the colonization, the war against African people for the last 600 years, on the stolen land of the indigenous people, in which all white people have participated in maintaining this situation, carried out the kind of terror that Chairman Zaki Baruti was just talking about, that just so a million times of that kind of terror that's been inflicted against African people by the white population, and understanding, as we have fought for ever since the foundation of the African People's Solidarity Committee, that our responsibility is reparations to African people before anybody knew, in the white community even knew what that word meant. Yes. The party sent us out there to win that, to organize that, and to actually do it in practice, to be able to turn over the stolen resources. And I want to salute Deputy Chair Onusine Yeshitela over the economic front, the political economic front of the African People's Socialist Party, under whose leadership, incredible leadership, most of us in the solidarity movement work in our day-to-day work, and give us the leadership on how to fight for these reparations, and what are the projects and programs of dual power that must be built for. And this has been an incredible journey. The chairman has taught us that it's not a struggle against racism, that it's not about white people changing the ideas in their heads and thinking all we have to do is put a Black Lives Matter sign in front of our house and that we're the good white people. It's not about that at all. It's about saying, where do we stand on the question of the stolen wealth of African people, which the Caribbean countries just came out with a report saying that $131 trillion is owed just to African people, basically in the Caribbean, from these stolen African human beings, based on the work that the chairman did and has done, the first tribunal and all the tribunals on reparations to African people beginning in 1982. This is what we take out. This is what we take on. And this is the revolutionary movement. It's not going to be the white left and white people determining what African people really need. It is under the leadership of the African Revolution in unity with all oppressed and colonized peoples, building, as the chairman calls it, the anti-colonial free speech movement, which is fighting for African and national liberation. That's our leadership. That is our leadership. That's the only way that we can change all the things, the nuclear power, the bombs, the environment, the gender issues, all the things that white people raise. It is going to change through the leadership of the African Revolution. That is the central question, the colonial question. So I just really want to salute Chairman Omali Yeshitela. I want to say that I am also one of the Uhuru 3 that was part of an attack on the chairman that they, for the first time in history, that they had to come to the south side of St. Louis, to the white community. They couldn't just do what they did to Fred Hampton and come at 4 o'clock in the morning and no white person knew about it. They had to come to 2654 Gravois, a building owned by the African People's Socialist Party, that says unity through reparations that we work out of in South St. Louis. They had to come there. The FBI had to come with all of their flashbang and their assault weapons and all of those things to attack and break down the doors of the Uhuru Solidarity Center. Yeah. That was very critical because that did not happen in the 1960s. And this is part of what the chairman said, that the necessity of APSC, why the party created also, is to end the isolation of the African working class. So the party is winning. The chairman has stated that African people will be free. White people can stand on the forward side of history. We can be part of the future in genuine solidarity with African people. I want to say drop the charges against the Uhuru 3 and unity through reparation.
Uhuru comrade, now we will get a solidarity statement. Oh my goodness, where'd it go? We get a solidarity statement from the Uhuru Solidarity Movement Chair, Jesse Neville.
Hands off Uhuru. Uhuru, thank you, Comrade Fofi. And I am also very honored to be here at the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement's International Convention. And I want to begin by uniting with and just expressing my complete unity with the presentation by Chairwoman Penny Hess, who speaks for me as a member of the African People's Solidarity Committee and the chair of our mass organization, Uhuru Solidarity Movement, and all of the members of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement throughout the country and the world. We extend our profound solidarity and salute to this incredible convention, to the leadership of Impedum, President Matsamela Odom, and join in saluting the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, Chairman Omali Yeshitela and Deputy Chair Ona Zane Yeshitela, who have dedicated their lives and made every sacrifice to dismantle the colonial mode of production that is the destroyer of life on the planet Earth, and replace it with a liberated and socialist world where Africa and African people are free and self-determining, and no one profits off the exploitation and suffering of another. And we are very honored to have been assigned a role in the African Revolution to go back into the white community, as Chairwoman Penny laid out, and expose other white people to the truth about this country, this system, this government that Chairman Omali Yeshitela and African internationalism has taught us, and to recognize that everything we have has come from centuries of violence, theft, slaughter, and war against African, indigenous, and colonized peoples. Solidarity and unity with the anti-colonial struggle for Black power under the leadership of the African working class is the true basis for an anti-imperialist, revolutionary, or socialist stance for white people. As Chairman Omali Yeshitela famously said, the road to socialism is painted black. There can be no true socialism without reparations, the real redistribution of the wealth into the hands of its original producers, African and colonized people. So for every white person who hates this social system, who believes that capitalism must go, it is time to join the fight against colonialism and the movement for reparations to African people as a revolutionary and anti-colonial demand. And I want to close by saying that I truly believe that when the history of the end of imperialism is written, July 29th of 2022 will go down in history as one of the most colossal miscalculations the US government they thought by indicting Chairman Omali Yeshitela, they would silence Chairman Omali Yeshitela and be able to stop the African liberation movement. And that by indicting Chairwoman Penny Hess and myself as part of the Uhuru 3, they would silence the party's strategy to win white people to stand in solidarity with Black power. On all fronts, they were wrong. A movement is rising up, and this conference inspires us to mobilize millions of white people to pay reparations to African people, to stand in solidarity with the African Revolution as our revolution, and to demand the US government drop the charges against the Uhuru 3, hands off Chairman Omali Yeshitela, unity through reparations.
You know, I unite with Comrade Jesse when he said that the FBI, they picked the wrong one. Or did they pick the right one? Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay, Comrade. I know you smell it aroma soon. Now, comrades, last year, I got my middle African name, which is Ushairi, which is poetry in Swahili or poet. Now it is time for other comrades to get their African names. And to do so, I bring you Chairman Omali Yeshitela and S.G. Luwezi Kinshasa, Uhuru Chairman.
Uhuru. Well, thank you very much. I don't know if we said it earlier, but Comrade Brother Secretary General Luwezi Kinshasa, he is located in London, and he has been exiled from Congo. He's born from the Congo, and I wanted to just make that statement because I think it's very important for us to constantly have before us recognition of the universality of the struggle of our people. Also, I wanted to say that we use this slogan, a fist up, fight back. And if I'm not mistaken, that's the slogan that came about during a march we had right in Ferguson, where the leaders of the march had indicated nobody was supposed to say anything, just supposed to be really quiet and just march down the streets. And so people they were going hands up, don't shoot, hands up, don't shoot. And I think it was Comrade Diop who kicked off the slogan, fist up, fight back. And that's been, So this issue of names and naming is really, really important to African people. I think it's important to all people, but you look at African people who have been kidnapped and assaulted, whole domination of our people, our whole African continent, and dispersal of African people all around the world by colonizers. This assault on our history is incredible. In fact, I think it's Emil Counteroffensive who stated that the African Revolution is about African people re-entering into history. So it's an assault on our history, and this question of names. I mentioned earlier this concept of Francophone, of French Africa. There's Cameroon. They named African people after shrimp, a nigger area. Just the colonizer imposes everything, your identity, the identity that he would have for you. This name thing is very, very serious. And so even though names are important for everybody, they are of critical significance to African people whose names imposed on us by the colonial process separated us from our identity and our history. And so that's even why African people, and had to do this even under attacks and threats, because African women in this country, when I say this country, I mean the United States, even before having become conscious of being African nationals or from the African nation, African women, long time ago had started naming African children, things that had nothing to do with being Judy and Mary. I'm not attacking any Judys and Marys in the house. Betty Jo, so names start being born, Shanika, and all these other kinds of names, and it's really interesting because they all bear resemblance to African names, traditional African names, but our people, just seeking our identity where we could find it. So the question of names is very important. And our names connect us with identity going back many millennia. Our names connect us to our ancestry through a history stemming from the beginning of human consciousness. Unlike other animals that do not have a similar consciousness, humans have the ability to name and define ourselves. And choosing our own names is one of the most important acts of self-definition. Traditionally, no African name is without meaning. Whether it is to designate the day of birth, a complicated pregnancy, the older or younger of twins, expectations of success, the return of a deceased relative, loved one, or heroic figure, etc. Colonialism is the near total domination of Africa and Africans by foreigners and aliens. It has severely altered the ability of Africans to control our identity and our capacity for self-definition that is critical to the African naming process. For example, Europeans carved up Africa into a number of various territories they named to identify them as white possessions. They named them to identify them as white possessions. Also, once in control of Africa, whites imposed English, French, Portuguese, Spanish, and other European names on African people under their colonial domination. The same thing has happened to Africans in the US, with the great difference being that in the US, Africans have also been robbed of language and consciousness of African culture, though it does exist unrecognized among us. I just briefly want to say this whole notion that somehow, and I've had this argument inside this country with Africans born here, I've had this argument with Africans born on the continent of Africa, that somehow we're not Africans because we lost African culture. They missed the boat. The fact is that we have not lost African culture. African culture has become so ubiquitous throughout this country and this world that it's no longer recognized as African culture. It is African culture. And when they do that, they come up with specious and bogus arguments about, you don't speak African language, et cetera, et cetera. Every language you speak English, what they call English in this country is an African language. It ain't what white people speak. And there was a time when I was growing up that we could talk what they call English and white people know what the hell we were talking about. Right in front of their faces, et cetera. So the truth is, you can find an African born and living in Sierra Leone and won't know what the hell an African speaking Xhosa or Zulu in South Africa is talking about. And that does not make them not Africans. They just make them Africans coming from different experiences through our colonial relationships, et cetera. You understand what I'm saying? And so you want to hear African music, you don't have to go to Fela. You can dig up Little Richard, Ray Charles, Mahalia Jackson, and what have you. That ain't no white people's music, is it? No. That's African music. So I just wanted to say that. And so we say that despite this fact, Africans colonized within the United States have always fought for our identity, including our names. The amazing worldwide movement led by the New York-based Marcus Garvey under the slogan, Africa for Africans at home and abroad, in the first quarter of the 20th century is the best evidence of the latent fidelity of Black people everywhere to our African identity. Many Africans colonized within the United States always sought and adopted African names. If you go back to look at some of the old jazz artists, going back before the whole thing got hip to have an African name, you would see some of these jazz artists, who had adopted African names, back in the 50s and what have you, early. So really interesting kind of thing. In some cases, African mothers have invented names for their children as a form of resistance. This has become increasingly evident over the last several years to the dismay of many proper Africans and colonial authorities. Our task today is to take custody of this natural instinctive movement by Africans toward achieving a connection with Africa through adoption of African names as a form of decolonization resistance. We should use the tradition of giving our children names with significance, names that identify our children with their African nationality. There are several approaches to naming ceremonies which are often determined by practice within different ethnicities and locations in Africa. Naming practices have a thread of commonality throughout the continent, however. For example, naming ceremonies concern more than the birth parents, relatives and community are always involved. In fact, sometimes a number of relatives of significant community persons or significant community persons may actually choose one of the names of a child. I started, when I'm going through checkout lines at Walmart and other places, I start with some of the checkout persons when they have their names written on their African men and women, and they have this, where does name come from? And I don't know, my mama just named me that, or it's a combination of my cousin, Mary, and somebody else over there, and they come up with another kind of name. I do that all the time because African names have meanings, and so we say that names have meaning. They often represent the aspirations of our community for the newborn child. The community may have aspirations for the child, and that name will reflect those aspirations coming from that community. I've seen it, I've experienced it. I was named like that, even though the name wasn't immediately African. I was named in that fashion for aspirations. Today, the unification of African people is a task that is fundamental to our progress as a people. Therefore, we are not concerned so much of the ethnic origin of a name. We are Africans. And the names we choose must represent that reality more than anything else, regardless of the ethnicity or region usually associated with the name. Also, we must free ourselves from the tendency to name female children in a way that locks their responsibilities and aspirations in limited and bourgeois gender-determined roles. Examples of fierce African women warrior leaders, revolutionary scholars, builders, and producers must accompany other identities usually associated with women. This will free women and men from the colonial-based assumption that the role of women is so prescribed that they dare not imagine themselves in liberating ways. We should participate in creating a practice of adopting names that speak to our unique, our unquenchable aspirations for total liberation and unity. Our names must exemplify joyful resistance and organization. Naming must be viewed as an act of anti-colonial self-determination. The names we choose must predict the future of a free, joyful, creative, and united Africa and African people. So let's look at some names. So the names we are looking at, am I proper now? Am I appropriate? Or we're going to go to the S.G. Louisi right now?
Yes.
Let's bring S.G. Louisi up, and he's going to talk about the name. And we're going to be looking at the names for Parish Lachelle Davis, who is changing the name. And we're also looking at the name for Tafari McGarry, who will be achieving a middle name. So turn it over to S.G. Uhuru. Oh. How do you deal with that? Okay.
Okay, so you're in there. Yeah. Okay, you're connected, okay. Okay, I'm gonna let them know, because you might be a panelist. I mean, you might be an attendee.
Uhuru comrades, how have you enjoyed this convention this day? Yes. This is fun for me.
Yeah.
You know, serving the African people is serving my family. And some I know, some I don't. But fist up. Fist up. Uhuru.
So this is Irish.
Yes.
We still don't have the race. Oh, Uhuru. And there's coming Parish too, Uhuru Parish. How are you, sister?
I'm doing well, Uhuru Chairman.
Uhuru.
You can hear me.
Yes, I think, go ahead, Louisi.
Yeah.
Uhuru.
Yeah, welcome. Right. Sorry for the connection. The internet on the laptop just gone down, so he's not coming back. So on my phone, I'm not sure how good it is, but I'm just so excited just to be part of this process. So I just want to thank the chairman and the Impediment President for President Masamela for the opportunity to be part of this historical cultural revolution. You know, we are part of just reclaiming our names, our identity, and defining ourselves. It is just critical. So what we have for our comrade here, we have, of course, three parts: the first name, the middle name, and the surname. And the first name, this is Zai. Zai is basically, to know, it's wisdom, but particularly just the love of knowing. There's someone who is into knowledge. So that's Zai, and there is a variety of pronunciation depending which part of where the speech you are, but Zai definitely is one of them. And the second part is basically the messenger, the one who carry the message, the one who was being commissioned to take the message somewhere, and so and we chose this one because to make a connection, the practical part, someone who knows, who has knowledge, who is wisdom, who is wise about what for. And we say to carry the message, so that wisdom is also part of the collective benefit, for the people and something like that. So that's why we have Zai, Villa. And the last part is Vidisa. That's the one who put things together, brings people together, and the one who, move from a single quantity to multiple quantity, the one who's for the abundance. We're talking about building a mass movement, we want to bring people together. We want to collectivize what we have. So, and that's basically like the meaning the whole names, all three names basically should convey. Zai, Davila, Vidisa. That's basically yes, word.
This is a name, that process that we share with the village. Is Tafari accessible now? But he is? Okay, this is the name, that process that we share with the village. So it is not just her name. It is a name that we have to indicate the unity that we have with this name. People who know her, people who have worked with her, and that includes obviously people who are a part of NPDA here and in various other places. So that's something that we want to consider when we talk about that. And then there's a comrade. We have here comrade Tafari Mugera. He is in occupied Zambia, commonly known as South Africa. Comrade Parish, Sister Parish is in San Diego, California. Comrade Tafari is there in South Africa. And Comrade, can you say something about this game, Comrade Secretary General?
Yes, well, Chairman. And for those comrades and who don't know who Comrade Tafari is, he's just an excellent comrade, as people experience him. And so I've been trying to find out a name to match somebody who is already doing great work, who is committed to build a party and to take party throughout Africa and to consolidate the party in Southern Africa where he's located. So I came with the word Sindisa, and which basically means to make strong, to make this strong, to fortify, to deepen. And anyone who knows Comrade Tafari works, wherever he is, he gets the party to be deep rooted. He makes sure the party has strong roots, and he makes sure everyone, fights and stick to what the party has laid out. So fortify the party, deepen the party, deepen the understanding of everyone around him. So I thought this name will be appropriate for Director Tafari. So this also is a name that it comes from the Congo speaking group. So Sindisa, Uhuru Chairman.
I want to, we call this a rebirthing process. And I wanted to ask Sister Parish, what do you think of this name? Do you feel like it reflects who you are? Is it a name that you find acceptable?
I do. I'm excited. Zai, I like it. I'm honored, and I started through Impedum. That was my introduction to the Uhuru movement. So I'm very honored, and I'm excited to, embody this name in its totality, Uhuru.
Is there any issue or problem of people? I know we know Comrade Sister Parish. She is a part of this village. Do we find any reason to think this name is not acceptable or appropriate for for the sister who we know up to now as Parish. Right, so I just want to say then that we then can unite with this thing of Zai, Davila, Vidisa. That is a rebirth name. That is the name of the sister once known as Parish. And so Uhuru. 2023, then we can say that we have a certificate of rebirth that we confer on Comrade Sister Zaid, Davila, Wendisa, Uhuru. You heard things said about by Comrade Secretary General Luezi about Comrade Tafari. And it's hard to exaggerate the role that he plays. He is the immediate director of the work that we do on the continent of Africa. He's organizing all over Africa. And he is the party's chair in South Africa. So Comrade Tafari, we talking now about conferring a middle name here to Tafari Mugari, and Sindisa is the middle name. So Comrade Tafari, what do you think about that name?
Uhuru, Chairman.
Uhuru.
Yes, thank you very much, Mafrika. I want to salute you, Chairman, and ST Luezi Kinshasa. Yeah, I'm so honored, to receive this name today, and I'll carry it with pride, on my shoulders. So,
There's a relationship between these two names that we've done today, it seems to me. That's a casual observation, Comrade Secretary General Luezi. Is there anybody who can see any issue with this name? We can agree then that with this name. So then on this day, on September 9, 2023, we want to present to Comrade Tafari Sindisa Mugari this certificate of rebirth. Uhuru, Comrade Sindisa, welcome home. Uhuru. So that's what we have in terms of the renaming process. And like we said, names are very, very important to us. So thank you very much. Comrade Secretary General Luezi.
Oh, Chairman.
Thank you. Yeah. Comrade Secretary General, he does a lot of work around linguistic questions in Africa and the history of language and things like that, and names, et cetera. So that's why he's been really important to this process. It's he who, I think Comrade Luezi said something that if we learned something like 7 languages, we could speak, every language on the continent of Africa. And truthfully, what is happening now is that we are in the process of giving birth to another language, and right now, African language that unifies a lot of the languages, and in the process of making revolution, we come up with new terms and definitions and things like that that will be embodied by the African nation once liberated. So where are we now, Comrade? So Comrade Fofi, you want to?
Thank you, and congratulations to the new birth people. Now, I would like to say 2 things. The bathrooms are to the left, my left, and to my right, my right, your left. And it's time for carols. We have vegan, we have vegan and vegetarian lasagna and salad. So if you would please, what is it? Yeah, line up accordingly and Uhuru. Return at 2 o'clock. Uhuru? What do you think about this convention so far?
If she's ready.